Yugoslavia, where all could belong, under the leadership of a visionary man, Joseph Tito, the leader of violent Yugoslavia forever. Our spirit never dies. In our hearts we hold the memories, reaching for the skies. Oh, Tito's legacy lives on in every heart and soul. United we stand as one nation bold. Hey, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Through the valleys and mountains, we'll stand side by side. Tito's vision, our eternal guide. Yugoslavia forever, spirit never dies. No, it don't. Our spirit never dies. It just won't die, it won't die. It won't die, can't die. Tito's legacy lives on. It won't die. It don't die. It can't die. We will never die.
Huh? Welcome. It just won't die, you guys. It just won't die. How do you like that? That's your, I don't know if you want to call it a review of Yugoslavia, and I don't know how much you're actually going to have to learn about Yugoslavia. So, whatever. But hey, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to tonight's stream. It's all history tonight, especially going to be helping out all of the brave souls in AP World History. Y'all been grinding all year. And I want to help you out any way I can here in this last, 12 hour, I don't know, whatever, whenever you're taking it, 18 hours, I guess, until the test. If you're not an AP World History student, that's cool too. We're just going to be talking history tonight, but I especially want to help everybody that's taken AP World History, which is what I teach. But I have a very international audience of all ages, so everyone is welcome here today. So I'm going to go ahead and answer any questions, anything you guys want to talk about. We'll do it. Okay, so a few ways you can get your questions in. Of course, you can post them in the chat. If anyone wants to donate to the channel by doing a super chat, I'll definitely prioritize any questions you guys got. But anything you guys got, we can talk about it real quick. So a few things I won't be able to do. I'm not going to be able to read any essays or any free responses you guys have done. Obviously, I can't do that. But if you have tips or you want some tips or you have any questions about, we can talk content if you want. I know you got specific questions about like writing or, anything like that. We can do that. The more specific, the better, obviously. So I can hit a whole bunch of different questions. And I guarantee you, if it's a question that you guys have, it's going to be helpful to anyone else. So anyway, I'm hoping for more kind of specific things that I could get you. So anyway, with that being said, yeah, I'll go ahead and get to just stuff as I see it coming up. And we'll do it. So let me see. Let me just put up one more little banner real quick. Got a question. Ask in chat. Okay, we'll just put this on the bottom real quick. Actually, yeah, that'll work. Okay, cool. All right. But yeah, if you guys got anything, how are we on audio, by the way? Everybody doing okay with that? And then, yeah, I'll just try to bust out. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on any big things. I mean, like, you know, this is a great question. Main events from every time period, that would take so long. I just don't think I can do that right now. Something that detailed, because that's, I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot. If you have something more specific, because there's going to be a bunch of questions, I want to hopefully just kind of knock out a bunch. Okay. So I'm going to scroll up a little bit and see what we got here. But yeah, if you don't, if you're not a student, that's cool too. I guarantee we'll be talking about something very cool. So if you are not an AP student, AP stands for Advanced Placement. It's basically a college level course taught to high schoolers, which is what I do. And tomorrow, nationally, is the national exam to see if you get that college credit or not. So if you're not an AP student, maybe if you're like, what the heck, you're from another country, you're like, what does this mean? That's what that is. So nationally, there's a test tomorrow. And this course covers history from roughly 1200 to the present. And it's the whole world. So that's what you got. All right, I'm going to go through and just kind of see what questions I see here. Just getting a whole bunch of good luck stuff to everybody. We got a lot of former students I know that are out here. If you have taken this course before, feel free to offer any advice you have to anybody. You know, it's all good. So a lot of you coming over from Heimler's server. Steve Heimler, good buddy of mine. Is awesome. He's doing an A push review. So for AP US, so I know a lot of you came over from there. Hopefully, if you're an AP student, you came by. If you stick around in the community afterwards, this is, you know, just a history channel. I do a lot of all kinds of stuff, and hopefully I can see you more. There are a couple things I might be using again before I get to answering questions, but some overall guides, unit guides, stuff like that. If you want copies of them, you'll need to come over to my Discord server. The Discord server is linked down below. It should be linked, and hopefully I can get some mods in here. Let me tell my Discord server. But in the AP students channel, I posted some PDFs and things of some things that you might find useful. Now, with it being, you know, less than, you know, it's being like 18 hours till the test, there is, you know, so much you can do from now. Mostly what you should be focusing on between now and the test is any weak areas. You're not gonna be able to cram all the content, obviously, from now until then, but knowing what your weak areas are. Go through, for example, the go through the learning objectives and that kind of stuff, and really try to identify those things. If you're struggling with writing, hopefully you're to that point where you are, you know what you're good at and what you struggle with. You know what I mean? So anyway, let's go ahead and with that being said, let's go ahead and see what we got here. I did see a super chat pop up. I want to make sure those people get a special shout out for supporting the channel. What was the dollar figure adjusted for inflation of tea that we threw in the harbor? Yeah, not an AP question. That's a great question though. If that was actually in the test, that'd be great. No, but the Boston Tea Party was like millions of dollars. For real, from what I have learned. Like, it was a major thing, probably a good $1 million worth of tea. Like, it was a big deal. So, and you know, remember, I guess just to tie this into AP content, remember that what the Americans are protesting, you know, at its core, started with taxes, and there was so much taxation that the British were putting on the Americans, new taxes. And remember, those are a result of the 7 Years' War and the British trying to recoup a lot of their losses. And what they started doing was taxing their colonies, and the Americans, you know, didn't like that and wanted to sort of surround their justifications around the, you know, no taxation without representation thing, because the British did not give representation in Parliament to their colonists. So that seemed like maybe the smarter way to go about doing that, rather than just being like, yo, I just hate taxes, because one of the problems was, like, in America in the 13 colonies, you were actually paying fewer taxes than you were if you were actually in Britain itself. So anyway, so, you know, trying to boycott things. And the thing is, with the protests, the British actually lifted a lot of the taxes, but not the tea. But not tea, because everyone freaking loves their tea in those days. So they wanted to use it by boycotting, and that hit the British hard. So Supreme Katie, thank you so much for your super chat there. Professor What is coming in. Next original content that's coming, it depends on the editors. I've got about 4 projects out to different editors right now, and honestly, it depends who comes back. Some of the original videos I've got coming out here soon that are, again, just waiting for editing. I've got a little just like World War I and whatever amount of minutes, few minutes video. I've got one on the French Revolution. That one, I don't know if that's coming back. I've got one on ancient, what I call biological warfare. I got a video being edited on that. So it kind of just depends on what's going to be out there. But all right, let me go ahead and start looking for the AP questions. AP related stuff. Crap. I know I'm going to be already kind of behind on them. So let's see. I'm looking at the chat, looking to see when, when the questions, like when after the video, because someone were like, what is that montage? It's an funny AI song about Joseph Tito, who was leader of Yugoslavia and the communists there. All right. Can you summarize Unit 4 in brain rot terms? Yeah. Europeans are hitting the seas, and they're able to do that because of technology. Why are they doing that? The Ottoman Empire has taken over Constantinople, and those routes are kind of hostile territory with the warfare. So Europeans are like, hey, we got to find another way to get to Asia. So we better start trying to find a way to sail. Problem is, no one from Europe has ever sailed to Asia before. So everyone's going out. They took a lot of the technologies that already exist in the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Make sure you guys remember a few of the technologies. First, the lateen sail, which came out of the Arab world, actually probably adopted earlier, like Romans were using something. Lateen sail is a triangular sail for ships that's good for crosswinds. Add that to square sails, and then you can hit all kinds of different angles. The astrolabe, which was a device used to find your latitude. Europeans were using that as well. Again, all these things pre-existed in the Indian Ocean trade networks for centuries before that. However, the Europeans did add some technology with ship technology. You're going to see them use caravels, carracks, and flutes, which were different ships that were good for long seas travel. So they start going different directions. Vasco da Gama, first European to sail to India. Portuguese are the one that started that age of exploration. Columbus is like, tripping on, bad science and math because of his brother, and is like, yo, the world's way smaller than people think. We can sail west a few weeks and get to Asia. Wrong, but do come across the Americas. So there you go. Maritime empires. Can you compare different Chinese empires? Okay. We can do a little bit of that. We can do some compare and contrast. Here's some stuff for you. Biggest continuity you want to know between the Chinese empires is Confucianism. Goes back to about 600 BC, but it was the societal and government philosophy of China that went through multiple dynasties. At its core, if you remember, Confucianism has 5 key relationships, and almost all of the dynasties were like, we're good. Said that in Confucianism, that there are 5 key relationships that everybody needs to adhere to for a stable society. All right. So what you have, first and foremost, filial piety. It's respect for your elders, your parents, specifically. I believe that is a core value for society. Okay. Also, ruler to subject, subject to ruler, wife to husband, younger sibling to older sibling. Okay. And then the last one is friend to friend. Friend to friend is the only Confucian relationships that is on equal terms. All the other relationships have somebody that's a superior and an inferior to that. So it's respect for that person. Doesn't give you permission to be a crappy person in that above relationship, but you're supposed to be good at it. What's going to help you be good at it? Education. Now remember the ruler to subject relationship. Okay, in Confucianism, a good ruler is educated, which is why Confucianists believe in that and offer what's called the civil service exam. Many dynasties did that. Civil service exam was a national exam, not unlike your AP exam, that if you passed it, it was required to get in positions of government. And they did that. So yeah, the Song dynasty do that. Now you got to understand with the Yuan dynasty. So our course starts with the Song dynasty, starting about the 900s. They get yeeted by the Mongols in the 1300s, and that is the Yuan dynasty. But the Song dynasty, Chinese, right? They were Confucianists there and abided by those principles. Now the Mongols come in, Kublai Khan, they conquer it. They changed quite a bit of the structure. They're kind of the difference. Yes, they still believe, and Kublai believed in a lot of Chinese principles, but remember, like, they're not doing the civil service exam. They're going to be appointing leaders, to do that thing. So things kind of get paused a bit for that. They kind of get different with that. Now, the Mongols ended up ruling for about 100 years or so. Then they were overthrown by the Ming dynasty. The Ming dynasty are the make China great again people. Literally, that is what they were going for. They're like, let's return to the glory days of China from before the Mongols lived. Now, nobody living at this time was alive when the Song dynasty was around. So they're digging deep. So what was good about the Song dynasty and previous dynasties? Well, how about stuff like Confucianism and the civil service exam? They're going to be bringing that back. They want to get China ruled by the Chinese again because they always saw the Mongols as foreigners, right? So you had the Ming dynasty. Fast forward to the 1600s, and they are going to be overthrown. There's rebellions in the Qing dynasty. Now, who are the Qing? They are Manchus. Manchus are not ethnic Chinese in the eyes of the dominant Han dynasty people that generally rule China, but they legitimized themselves, the Manchus, by adopting things like Confucianism and civil service exam. They tried to do that and legitimize their rule. So that's one of the greatest similarities there. So I would focus on those similarities and differences there, Ryan Cooks. All right, thank you. That was a little bit longer, a little bit more than maybe, I mean, it's hard to, I got so many questions. If you guys got, again, especially more specific stuff at this point, that's awesome. All right. A quick summary of 1750. It's the era of all kinds of revolutions. This is your revolutions era, okay? You're going to get Enlightenment principles, which is going to be the foundation for the political revolutions like the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, Latin American revolutions, and then also the economic stuff that comes out of the Enlightenment that's going to lend itself to the Industrial Revolution, like laissez-faire and capitalism, all the Adam Smith stuff. So this was the era of revolutions. What you're going to want to be able to do also is compare and contrast those revolutions. That has been an LEQ and short answer type things a lot. So make sure you can compare and contrast. Think about revolutions that were about independence, right? Say like the Haitian Revolution or the American Revolution. French Revolution was more about civil rights because they're rebelling. They're their own country, right? That makes sense. So Industrial Revolution is a revolution in technology and economics as well. So that's what I think you especially want to be focusing on there, okay? Let's see. What else? Okay, so we had Ryan's. Opium War. Basically, okay, Opium War is important, you guys. It is one of the first great sort of tragedies for China in the century of humiliation it's referred to. The 1800s were a really bad time for the Qing dynasty. Why? The rest of the world around them is advancing greatly, and a lot of that was militarily. Now, remember, China, the context of this, China has been very protective about trade. They like to export, but they do not like to import. That's actually something that's been a major feature of Chinese society since the ancient days, way before our course even started. The issue is they are not advancing technologically like other places are, and that's going to lead them very vulnerable. So Europeans have been trying to break down the door since the 1500s of China when the Portuguese started showing up, but it was very, very restricted, and they didn't like that. Europeans want to be able to sell their crap, right? And in the industrial era, they especially want to be able to sell stuff because the China is an enormous market. So they start forcing themselves in by putting in more and more people, start breaking around a lot of the rules. Now, there were a lot of rules about what China could even deal with when it came to what you could import. Now, China, again, will sell you your stuff, but they don't want to trade for your goods. And there's probably good reasons for that. First off, China probably up until this time makes stuff better than anyone else and at a better quality. Now, one thing that they were able to, specifically the British were able to get in was opium in their colonies in South Asia, around India, Pakistan, stuff like that. They're growing opium. Opium is a very hallucinogenic, addictive drug that's very destructive. And the British found ways to be able to smuggle that in and made a ton of money. In fact, there's a crazy stat that something like a fifth of the British GDP was like off drugs. The British are the biggest drug dealers in history. Well, anyways, early 1800s, it's wrecking Chinese civilization. The emperor, who was probably even using opium, was like, hey, we got to enforce this because we have a major drug epidemic on our hands. So they send a letter basically to the British government and are like, hey, opium, which was always illegal to trade, they're like, we are now going to enforce it. British are like, no way. Again, we make a fortune off of this, show up with their navy, and they are able to blast the Chinese. Chinese are unable to withstand this, at all. So what they do is are forced into unfair and unequal treaties. Opium will now be sold even more. They will have to open up, China will have to open up even more trade into a lot of different places. It really breaks them open. Okay. Now, this made China look very weak in their population to foreigners, and they're being exploited. So this is going to have big effects. And not long after the Opium Wars, you're going to get the worst peasant rebellion in history, the Taiping Rebellion, which was kind of a peasant rebellion led by a guy who's super fascinating, if you're not aware of Hong Xiquan, who was a former school teacher that also thought he was the reincarnated brother of Jesus, from what I remember. And he leads a giant rebellion, goes about 10 years, 20 million people died, probably as much as World War I. Crazy. Rebellions put down. They want land reform and other types of rights. The Qing government's going to have to capitulate and give up to that. Then that ends is going to lead to further exploitation by foreigners, leading up to the other problem they're going to have towards the end of the 1800s, which is rebellion starting in the cities with the righteous and harmonious fists, also known as the Boxers. I'll always love that name, the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. It's an anti-foreigner rebellion in the late 1800s. They're like, we want the foreigners out. Now, a coalition of 5 countries or something come in and put that thing down violently. It was also around this time that Japan, which was doing some imperialism of their own, was also trying to colonize into, especially like Manchuria and other port cities, like what's it called, Tsingtao, and they kicked the Chinese butt as well. So bad time for China. All right, I went way too far on that one. For our purposes, for Shia and Sunni Muslims, for our curricular purposes, you want to understand that this split started with the death of Prophet Muhammad in the 600s, and there was a fundamental disagreement about successor to Muhammad. Shia are the ones that believe it should be a direct descendant from Muhammad. And then Sunni Muslims believe it's somebody that should be chosen from the community. So that started kind of the divide. Now, there are going to be other theological differences between Sunni and Shia Muslims. You're not going to really need to know those for the purposes of our class, but understand that it did break apart the Islamic community. Maybe not unlike, if you want to compare it to like Protestants and Catholics during the Protestant Reformation. So that's going to be a big deal. Now, some governments will organize themselves as Sunni Muslims or Shia Muslims. Now, Sunni Muslims have been and really always been the majority of Muslims by far. But you will have a lot of Sunni governments. When you get to Unit 3, the land-based empires, you're going to learn about them. The big 3, Mughals, the Safavids, and the Ottoman Empire. Mughal Empire and Ottoman Empire are Sunni governments. The Safavids were a Shia Empire. That's of all the Shia governments, they are probably the most important to know about is the Safavid. And interestingly, they were sandwiched right between those empires because the Mughals ruled in India. The Ottomans are going to rule over in the Middle East, and they had conflicts on both sides of them for territory, and just they each thought each other also were heretics. So that's what you do. All right, for the LEQ, how to get complexity point. Okay, I seriously focused on one way this last 2 years since they changed the curriculum for the LEQ. 4 pieces of evidence. You need a minimum of 2 in your essay, 4 pieces of evidence, and you're going to get that complexity point. But I want to be a little bit more specific with that. Don't use all of your evidence to support one argument. Your thesis should be nuanced, meaning you have multiple arguments and some are stronger than the others. You know, in the prompt where you see that annoying thing that says evaluate the extent to something happens. You know how you what you need to be doing with that is like, what is your stronger arguments and what are your weaker arguments? So, you know, some type of cultural effects occurred to a large extent because of these things, but also occurred to a minor extent because of these things. Make sure your evidence is spread across different levels of your argument. Strong arguments or weak arguments, or arguments and counter arguments. Okay, this is what we talk about, giving nuance to your thesis. Make sure your evidence is spaced out that way between different levels of arguments, and you should be pretty good there. But remember, with using evidence on your LEQ, make sure you're specific. Make sure, you know, that T format, TEA, you'll probably learn that from Heimer. Make sure you summarize it, but then explain the evidence, define it, use key terms, use people, use events, and then make sure you analyze, meaning that you are explaining how it is proof of your thesis. But I suggest going for the 4 pieces of evidence thing to get your complexity point. Okay. All right. Seljuk Turks, what you want to know about them is they are going to come down. They convert to Islam. They come down to the Middle East. They're the ones that kind of shake things up, and you get the Crusades. That's who they are largely going to be fighting, but they were Muslim Turks. This is an interesting thing, too, because starting with the Turks, really you're going to get Turks are going to be the ones to dominate much of the Islamic world. After the fall of the Abbasids, who were, Arab, well, they were multicultural, but you're going to have an end of sort of the Arab domination of the Islamic world. And really from the Seljuk Turks onward, it's going to be dominated by Ottomans. All right, how long is the MCQ and is it divided with the SAQ? Okay, great question. Okay, multiple choice. You're going to have 55 questions in 55 minutes. It's the first section of your test. Hopefully you've done a lot of practice stuff and unit tests, throughout the year. But as you guys know, there's a stimulus, meaning either a document or an image or something. And you're going to have that. And then you're going to have maybe 3 to 4 questions related to that document. So if, the first question in a document set's going to take you a bit longer because you need to read the document. But overall, if you're averaging a minute per question, you're good to go. But obviously, again, that first question is going to take you longer because you need to read the document. So it will be in its own time period. That'll stop after 55 minutes, and then you're going to get your short answer section, which is next. So short answer, and that is 40 minutes. About. Okay, cool. All right, yep, you guys, audio is good. Sorry, I'm way behind. These are questions from 20 minutes ago. What's the most important thing I should remember from units 3 and 4? Aside, the unit 3 was about gunpowder and 4 about age of expiration. Okay, so I mean, this is very vague, and it's gonna be hard for me to cover all that because this would take like half an hour. But for unit 3, be able to compare and contrast the gunpowder empires. Compare their Islamic gunpowder empires. Contrast the way they governed, the type of people that they governed. Also from unit 3 and 4 for Europe, the most important thing you're going to want to know is about the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther, why do Protestants break away from the Catholic Church? Okay, for unit 4, it's going to be about the voyages, their maritime empires, ocean-based empires. Know which European states and how they are going to start colonizing the world through technology, especially with their sailing technologies. Going and maybe looking at the technologies. Now, for their colonization of the New World, make sure you understand the big thing that helped them there was disease, which killed 90% of the indigenous population, which was the biggest thing that led to the colonization of the Americas. Okay, Sun Yat-sen. So we want to get back to some China there. Yeah, so for Sun Yat-sen, I want to get his specific dates here. Make sure we do this. But he's going to be the first, basically, president of the Republic of China. So when the Qing dynasty collapses in the early 1900s, there's a temporary few decades here of rule as a republic, and he was that first leader. He was also the founded the first real political party of China, which is the Kuomintang. Now they're going to be the dominant political party in the Republic years. They're also going to be the group that the Chinese communists under Mao Zedong are going to fight. Sun Yat-sen will be done there, and by that time it'll be Chiang Kai-shek who takes over. But yeah, he's the leader of the First Republic of China, and that group again will fall to the communists in the Chinese Civil War. All right. All right, let's keep going. The best strategies for multiple choice. Great question. Yeah. So yes, read the documents as much as you might see these clickbait. I've seen these stupid clickbait YouTube videos that people are putting out right now. They're like, you don't even have to read the document, and I got a 5. Okay, those aren't normal people, and they're probably lying. Okay. Some strategies: read the source and read the question before you start. Make sure you read the source and read the question before you start. A lot of times the question can largely be answered actually by the source, and that's what a lot of those people looking for shortcuts look for. But that's not always the case, because a lot of the questions will be directly tied to the source. Now, here's the other thing you got to look out for. Okay, it's how they structure the ABCD. Okay, 2 of the 4 questions are going to be factually incorrect, or answers are going to be factually incorrect statements. Okay, regardless, you got to get rid of those quick. Okay. And you should do a process of elimination in multiple choice. Don't go for the first correct looking answer. Here's why. 2 of those questions or answers, like I said, are incorrect. There are going to be probably 2 other answers on there. And I keep saying questions instead of answers that are correct. There's a problem though. One of them is what we call the distractor. The distractor may be an answer that is a correct statement, but it doesn't answer the question. And maybe it wasn't covered in the prompt. It's like some kind of factual historical statement, but it doesn't answer the actual question. It's not as good of an answer as another one. Find the distractor. Make sure you don't pick the distractor. Don't pick the first true statement you see, because that may be the distractor. And they design that. That's how they design it. How did China become communist? They had a civil war, and they won. The Civil War started just before World War II broke out. And then after World War II, they continue it, and the communists defeat the nationalist Kuomintang party and drive them into Taiwan, where they keep going today. All right, Taiping and Boxer rebellions. Already talked about those. Taiping rebellion, peasant rebellion in China, mid-1800s, biggest peasant rebellion in history. It will be put down, but after the death of millions upon people, and it weakens the Qing government even further, even though they had won the war. Boxer rebellions toward the end of the 1800s. It's an anti-foreigner rebellion that also failed in China. All right. All right, what's the difference between Encomienda system? I'm assuming you mean Encomienda system and the Mita system. Okay, good. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. They're both kinds of coerced labor. The Mita system actually existed in the Inca Empire before the Spanish ever showed up. So the Inca didn't deal in writing or like monetary type of taxes. So what you did in the Inca Empire is, for part of the year, you actually worked if you want to think of it as like working off your taxes, instead of them being like money you give out, you worked for a certain time of the year for government jobs. That could be like maintenance jobs. It could be, I don't know, working in temples, working government-owned land. So for part of the year, you had to do that. That was your debt to society. Well, when the Spanish conquered the Inca Empire, they learned about this Mita system, and they're like, that sounds pretty good. And they just kept doing it. It's a continuity. The Spanish kept doing that. Encomienda system is another, it is a coerced form of labor. You're going to see that especially like in Central South America. And basically what it was the Spanish, they tried to make it sound like a win-win situation for both sides, but you basically are kind of forced into labor. And what you were supposed to get in return is like protection from the Spanish, and you get to be Christian. So it's basically a coerced kind of forced labor system. It's akin to slave labor pretty much. So that could be mining, which again, the Spanish do a lot of. Why do the Spanish really like mining? It's because in Asia, like in China, they will only accept gold and silver. So they just want that. So the big chunk of the world's silver, which is the first universal currency really in world history, comes out of the Americas, and they use those systems to be able to do that. Okay. I did see a super chat. The Book of Dark. $2 out of Aussie land, upside down land. Doesn't seem like a question, but you just said your amount and message will be public. That is true. If you want to do a super chat, I will prioritize your question for you, just as a thank you for supporting my channel there. Hope you guys, if you're again AP students new to my channel, please subscribe. I do history content literally every day, and I do a lot of fun stuff. Probably most known for my doing reactions to famous and popular history videos. I also do some original content, which I'm doing more of now. Actually, yesterday, I'd love if you guys all checked out my recent video on the Mongol invasion of Europe. It's about 9 minutes. It's really fun. If I got mods in here, maybe they can help me out and put some of that. But I'd really support. Thank you for that. All right, let's go ahead and keep going. Can you describe the impact of the Empire of Mali? Awesome. So Mali, famous for a couple things. So Mali's in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's like, you know, here's Africa. You got the Sahara under it on the west side. This side, if you're looking on my side there, is Mali. First off, they convert to Islam. Okay, the empire is founded by Sundiata, who was a Muslim convert, but didn't really like force them to be. Now you're probably going to be your most important person you're going to need to know about is Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was the king of Mali. He was a devout Muslim, and he was also wealthy. In fact, he might be the wealthiest man in the world. How? Mali makes a fortune off of gold. Gold and salt. And those were precious commodities traded north through the Sahara to the Islamic peoples of the north. That's also how Islam got to sub-Saharan Africa. Again, the Sahara is like an ocean, right? There's a lot of separation there. It's the size of the United States. But that's how Islam comes in there. Well, anyway, a lot of gold coming out of there, making a lot of people wealthy, including him, because he's the king, pretty much has a monopoly on it. But he was also very famous because of his performing of the Hajj. The Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, which is that it is required, or if you're able, to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. Well, Mali is very far from Mecca. Mecca's in Saudi Arabia. Mali's in West Africa. He goes on an entourage of thousands of people, loads up his wealth with like hundreds of camels full of gold, if you want to believe all this stuff, and with thousands of people, and they go all across North Africa, slowly making their way to Saudi Arabia. Now, this made a big impact because these guys are coming in loaded with wealth. There's like tens of thousands of people, and it got people very, very interested in sub-Saharan Africa. Because if you see these rich dudes coming out of there and you hadn't really heard about them before, you're like, whoa, we got to know more about these. So it created a lot more connection there. Some of the funny stories you might hear about is how, because they brought so much money with them, so much gold, that they would create inflation by showing up to these towns along the routes all the way to Saudi Arabia, and would pretty much create hyperinflation because they would put in so much money that it would like devalue their currency. It said it happened in Cairo, Egypt, which is a big city, injecting so much money at one time that it like create inflation apparently for years. Well, anyway, this really put Western Africa on the map in sort of the global sphere by learning about this guy. Now, another thing that Mansa Musa was doing on the way there and back was also recruiting people. He wanted his capital, like Timbuktu and his empire Mali, to be a intellectual, hub, just like these other places that existed in the Middle Ages in the Islamic world, places like Cordoba and of course Cairo and Damascus and these other areas. And he wanted to bring scholars and like mathematicians and engineers, and he brought a lot of them back to Mali on his way back and created some of the greatest universities and intellectual centers there in Timbuktu. You can actually see some of them. They're really cool, the architecture. So really put them on the map. All right, main idea is American, French, and Haitian. Okay, American Revolution was about two things. First, about taxes, and then about independence from Britain. So it's a colonial rebellion. The French, it started out as wanting to get more rights. They want they want to abolish the estate system. Everybody's legally equal. They want voting rights. It eventually turns into a revolution that will get rid of their monarchy completely. They first wanted a constitutional monarchy, eventually evolves into, well, they execute the king and queen and they create a republic. So it's about civil rights and government reform. The Haitian Revolution, twofold. Haiti was the most profitable colony of the French Empire. It was slaves. It was a slave colony. So it was two parts. The French Revolution did not give any independence or rights to the slaves of Haiti, or at least didn't really go down that way. And Napoleon actually wanted to revive all the slavery and get rid of a lot of those rights. So what the Haitians do is they're basically fighting for two things. One is to not be slaves anymore and also to get independence, and it works. Toussaint Louverture, know about him. He's a key revolutionary figure there. Haiti becomes the first, really and only successful slave revolt in history, and they create a republic in Haiti where it remains today. All right. Oh yeah, put a little poll in the chat. What do you think the DBQ will be? I couldn't put by unit because I can only get four slots for the poll. So I just did the time periods. Now remember, the DBQ will not be on 1200 to 1450. Reason why they do that is it's hard to do context if you're doing the first unit. So it'll cover something between 1450 and the present. So yeah, which time period do you think it will cover? You're probably hearing my early prediction. They're not predictions, guesses. Now they don't have a formula. I hope you guys don't believe that there's some formula or algorithm, some like equation they use to figure out what the DBQ topic will be. It doesn't work like that. But a lot of people predicting, am I going in? We're just looking at historically that have not been doing in DBQs, unit 3, unit 9. So, but no matter. Remember, DBQ, to get 6 out of 7 of the points on the DBQ, you don't have to know basically almost anything. Maybe not. Okay, you can get 5 out of 7 without knowing anything about history on the DBQ. And the only reason I say you can only get 5 out of 7 is context and outside evidence. Those points, you are going to need to know history outside of the documents. But for 5 of the 7 points, it's all from the documents. So remember, that is a skills-based essay more than anything. All right, let me check. Are there any other new super chats? No new super chats. That's fine. Let me take a little breather here and catch up. All right, let's see. Okay, next question. All right, let me go back to questions now. White Lotus Rebellion. White Lotus Rebellion was a rebellion against the Qing dynasty as well. One of the first major problems that the Qing dynasty really starting to hit is in the late 1700s. It does get squashed, by the Qing. The Qing were actually pretty successful at putting down the internal rebellions. It was the foreign powers they had the most problem with. But one problem with these rebellions, like the Taiping Rebellion or White Lotus, is it was devastating. And every time they would, they may win and squash these rebellions, it would permanently weaken them going forward. So anyways, you had that. With the White Lotus, if I remember right, it's kind of motivated by a lot of Buddhists who were hoping, more Buddhist stuff in the country. So anyway, cool. All right, let's see. It says, I started studying today. Am I cooked? Yes, you are. Sorry. Okay, HS Beth, what are your tips to answer the DBQ with confusing documents? Okay, if they're confusing, I hope they're not. But make sure that you organize the documents by similar documents. Okay, which documents have a similar theme, have a similar message going for them? That's what you want to do. Compare the documents. That's hopefully the best way to do that. Now, again, if you're getting confused by them, know the prompt. Look for exactly what's those, what is in those documents. Look for the information that has to do with the prompt. That's going to be the biggest thing for you there. If you have a more specific question, I can help, but yeah. All right, how did Islamic knowledge and science contribute to the European invasions? Yes, Basically, during the European Dark Ages, it was the Islamic world that was actually keeping a lot of the knowledge from the ancient European world. A lot of the Greco-Roman stuff, it was actually a lot of Islamic scholars that were preserving that stuff. Now, you guys heard of the Renaissance, right? It's kind of the rebirth, the supposed intellectual rebirth in Europe. They actually adopted a lot of that information that they're going to use was stored from the Islamic world, and it influenced Europeans. So Europeans took a lot of the innovations from the Islamic world that had happened in this Islamic world time period, but also stuff that had been preserved, like Aristotle's stuff from ancient Greece, and they injected that sort of it got injected into Europe there. Mercantilism is basically economic philosophy where you're supposed to benefit the empire. And mercantilism states that there is a finite set amount of wealth in the world, and the goal of your country needs to be to carve out the biggest percentage of that. So it's inherently competitive. You're trying to outcompete and get, all the world can be represented in one pizza, right? And everyone's trying to carve out their piece. So now that naturally also means that the bigger your piece is, the smaller someone else's piece is. And this can bring in conflict. It fuels imperialism, because it's like, where do we get our money? We get it from colonies. So we need to conquer as much colony as possible and more than the other people, right? So that was kind of the fueling force of the Age of Exploration era, because so much of this money was, again, going back to the crown and of these governments, and it's kind of the precursor also towards of capitalism, because eventually what you're going to have is more capitalism, so more like private ownership and less state control of that. What do I do if I don't know anything about the class and haven't studied at all? Pray. All right. Can you grade your LEQ? No. Use an AI service. I can't grade anyone's LEQs right now. I'm so sorry. All right. So Songhai. Songhai. We got another African state here. Okay. And this is, the Mali Empire is going to end up collapsing, and the Songhai are going to be a little bit later. So they're going to take over a lot of that territory in the West as well. So that's kind of a big part. So just basically understand that they are one of the largest empires in the West and Western Africa. Again, they're going to replace the Mali dynasty. They were Islamic as well. They're going to keep doing trade, across the Sahara. That's the biggest stuff you want to know about them. Okay. And then Gao is a trading port city There's actually a couple of Gaos at that time, but yeah, you have the one in Mali today, another kind of trade city. So you do have that as well. Well, there's Gao, and then I shouldn't say they're the same, because there's Goa and Gao. Sometimes I get them mixed up, which way is spelled, which way. So anyways. Van, shout out your teacher. Hello, Van's teacher. All right. Okay, let me go ahead. I'm going to scroll down a bit. I think I accidentally jumped ahead a little. Okay, yeah, I did. All right, sorry, I need to scroll up. History Showdown will be returning after I'm done with school stuff. We have the championship. Also got to coordinate all the guests. They're jumping around. Chris, logging through history, is going to Germany. So I just need to finish up. I need to finish up my major school stuff here. Mandate system. Great question. Okay, awesome. Mandate system. Mandate is another funny word for basically colonizing for a colonizer. Usually what you think of with the mandate system is what happened to the Ottoman Empire after World War I. So, after World War I, the Ottoman Empire is going to collapse. You're going to get an independent Turkey led by Ataturk. But then a lot of the Fertile Crescent regions and Mesopotamian regions end up becoming under mandate control of Britain and France specifically. So basically, Britain and France are going to kind of carve up the region. You're going to get what's called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which ends up being actually long-term quite a disaster. They start throwing up artificial borders, which is going to create all kinds of ethnic divisions. But anyway, so you had like Syria, which is going to be a mandate of the French, Palestine, and like Iraq, which is going to be a mandate by the British. Now, this pissed off a lot of those people because they were hoping to get independence, first off, because they had helped the British fight against the Ottomans in World War I. But basically, the British and French were like, you know what, y'all aren't ready for independence yet, so we're gonna hang around for a while. Oh, it also helps that you guys have a lot of like oil and other things that are really important to know. So anyway, that's basically what those mandates are. It's colonialism. Let's just be honest. All right. Krish Patel, thank you. History, or Mr. Terry History, can you give a refresher on triangular trade and Pacific trade? Cool. Yeah. So Triangular Trade Network is the network that starts going with the colonization of the Americas by Europeans. So the 3 points of this triangle are Europe, Africa, and the Americas. We're just going to consider all of that like a point of the triangle, okay? Because that means South America, it means the Caribbean, it means North America, you know what I mean? Now, the idea was essentially this. Britain is where goods are going to be manufactured into their final products. Now, either the wealth from that or the goods themselves are going to be sent south from Europe down to Africa to African tribal leaders. Now, they are going to get things like guns. There was some other material benefits and money. Now, what is coming from that point in Africa are slaves. The majority of slaves will be captured and enslaved by or captured by African nations who made a lot of money off of wars with other African nations and other African tribes, who would then sell that to the Europeans, who would then take those slaves and then take them to, depending on which colony you're talking about here, but go to different parts of the Americas. The highest percentage of the slave trade went to the Caribbean, about half probably there, between the Caribbean and definitely Brazil. Those were the two largest places. And then about 15% in kind of the other parts of Spanish America, and maybe about 5-10% to the British North 13 colonies. Now, what's going on there is slaves are then used for labor to acquire raw goods and raw resources from the Americas, where they are then sent from the Americas up to Europe, where they'll be manufactured into final products and sold. And then the triangular network continues. It's going to go on for centuries, going on and on and on. Now, some of that, you asked also about the Pacific. Yes, that is true. Now, remember, some of the biggest markets are in Asia. Actually, the biggest markets are in Asia. Now, I said this earlier, if you've been here the whole stream, places like India and places like China are not that interested in European-made goods. They don't need them. A lot of them aren't even as good. What they will take is money. In fact, China only wanted money, silver, gold. And so like what the Spanish especially did was a lot of mining out of the Americas, and they sent their gold across the ocean, across the Pacific, which was hard. The Spanish especially would land their stuff in the Philippines, which they colonized back in the 1500s. And Philippines was kind of like a hub where you had all this, stuff coming out of the Americas. And then from the Philippines, you could trade it up to Japan, you could trade it to China, you could take it to India. And so they are, sending that stuff to people like the Mughal Empire, who made a fortune off of American silver. What can I use to memorize the timeline for all the periods? And what are your biggest tips for the exam? Your biggest tips for the exam, obviously, answer all the questions. Your biggest tip is make sure you practice. Know what to expect. I think that's the biggest thing. Know what to expect. Know what's going to be covered. The AP curriculum, hopefully you've been doing this all year. They're pretty clear on what's going to be on the test. They've told you what are the big ideas. What are the terms you need to know? Okay. Know the rubrics. Know the rubrics inside and out for the writing. Know exactly what it takes to get the top score on the DBQ and the LEQ. They've made it clear as pretty much they possibly can. All right. So know what to expect. All right. Okay. I think I got a essay question. Okay. For the outside evidence and link for the LEQ and DBQ, do they have to be the same time period and or location as a prompt? No. That's a great question. No, they do not. I would try to at the best, if you have a bunch of things you're thinking about outside evidence, I would try to hit the same region and time period, but it's not specifically in the curriculum that it has to be. But try your best to stay within the time period and the region because it'll be more relevant to your prompt. Paul Revere was very real. Yes, he was real. Yep. Wealthy silversmith. All right. Looking for other AP specific things. What are the multiple choice questions really like? Well, hopefully you've been doing them all year. Hopefully you've been doing those type all year. Yeah, the multiple choice questions, you're going to have a prompt of some kind, or not a prompt, well, kind of. You're going to have what's called a stimulus. It's either going to be a document or an image, and you will answer questions that either are directly answered by the document itself or are about the topic the document covers. Every question set is going to be a mix of that. How hard are they? They're tricky. They're different than anything you've probably ever done in your academic history as far as, answering questions like, because it's not just like, you've taken like English classes, literature classes, you read the book and then answer questions about it. It's not just a fact. It's not identifying facts and dates. It's concepts. Will ever see a Mr. Terry reacts? I have 1,000 reaction videos on my channel. Can you talk about China after Mao's death? Yeah, what you mostly want to focus on after Mao's death is what is going to fast forward to, especially to like the 80s here. Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping was a communist, but he was also believed in economic reform. After Mao's death, you're going to see under Deng Xiaoping and this new communist leadership, a little bit of getting away of some of the collectivized command economy kind of features that really did not work very well when you saw what happened with like the Great Leap Forward and that. What they start doing is transitioning into, I don't want to say capitalism, but a lot more of those type of elements, more free market elements. They're going to start trading more with other countries. They're going to bring in investors. There is going to be some privatized ownership of things. Now, understand though that it'll still you may have privatized operation of your business, but you will still answer to the government. You still will do that. They're going to keep you in check and let you operate in a certain way. And what it did is it actually changed our economy. The Chinese economy is not a communist economy. There is private ownership of those of things that still exists. There's just a lot of government safety nets, and again, they will insert themselves into the economy and economic decisions of a business if they feel it's not in the best interest of the state. So, yeah, they actually become less communistic, but they will still stay a one-party system. And you saw that even under Deng Xiaoping and the late 80s when the whole like democratic revolution was going around in the world against communist states. You saw what they did at Tiananmen Square and under Deng Xiaoping, and then they squashed that. So they still have that going on. All right. Let's see. All right. Differences between Safavid, Mughal, and Ottoman. Okay, it's actually very simple. First off, let's get the similarities out of the way. They're all Islamic, and they all created their empire with gunpowder. They were innovators or the early empires to really utilize gunpowder to their effectiveness. Okay. Now, the differences are a couple things. Ottoman and the Mughal Empire. So Ottoman Empire is sort of in the Middle East, and then go over to India, where the Mughals invaded and took over. They are in India, but they are both Sunni Muslim by majority. Now, here's a couple of the differences. In the Ottoman Empire, majority of people are indeed Muslim, but they allowed for the religious protection, religious rights of the other religions, specifically like Jews and Christians. Now, the Ottomans did, though, impose the jizya tax, which is a very important term for you guys to know because it goes and almost across every Islamic empire. The jizya tax is basically a tax on non-Muslims. You could practice these other religions, but you will pay a tax. Now, the other thing the tax will get you is excused from some of the other duties that other Muslims might have to do, like as far as service in the government. For example, like join the military. Okay, like join the military may get you out of that. And that's, paying money is kind of like a way to make up for that, if you will. Okay. Anyways, the Mughal Empire, though, although they are Sunni and they're Sunni Muslim, they, though, rule over a majority of people that are not Muslims. Most people in India were Hindus. There's also a Sikh community and minorities of Christians and Jewish population. But mostly until towards the end of the Mughal Empire, though, they had granted full religious toleration. They actually didn't even do the jizya tax. There was no tax on non-Muslims. Akbar the Great is probably known for that, for really expanding the empire and then granting those, like, that religious toleration at that time. And they probably needed to, because if they tried to rule, and try to impose Islam over their population, they would have been revolted against. They would never have been able to hold power. And you actually saw it happen. Aurangzeb, who was the sixth of the Mughal rulers, right? You probably won't be able to memorize all the Mughal rulers, but if you know the first six, you probably won't know them, but you'll probably need to know the two most important to know. Well, I guess it's three. Babur, he's the first. He's the founder of the Mughal Empire. And later on, you're going to get Akbar, who's the third, and he's the most famous one. And then you get down to the sixth one, that's Aurangzeb. He made a really bad choice in the fact that he wanted to now impose Islam, and they were rebelled against, and their empire started to break apart with them. So if you know the Mughal emperors, that's great. Okay. There's the six great early ones: Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb. Then they have some minor ones after that. But after Aurangzeb, they really lost their control, because people were revolted against their rule, because they were starting to try to impose those things. Now, the Safavid Empire, the most important thing you want to know about them is that they were a Shia Muslim government. They favored Shia Islam. And that put them at odds with the beliefs of the empires on the sides of them, which are the Mughal and Ottoman Empire. Okay. What do we know about the second wave of imperialism, according to College Board? Hey, Carla, Roloba. Yeah, so the second wave of imperialism was motivated by industrialization. So this was imperialism in the industrial era. It was tied to the Industrial Revolution because of European need for foreign resources. So that drove imperialism. Also, it ties to mercantilism, which ties into all this, which is this belief that, there's a finite amount of wealth in the world, and you got to go and colonize as much of the world as you can to extract that wealth. That's what you need to know. The thing about the timelines is, remember, there's just 4 time periods you need to understand. Now, you don't need to know specific dates of any events, but you do need to know which events came before others. That's going to be the biggest thing you want to be able to do. Okay. DBQ predictions, I don't know. I mean, 3 and 9 are great picks, only because they haven't done those on those ones, but they can pick anything. So trying to predict and prepare based on a prediction of the DBQ is actually pretty stupid. By the way, I see a lot of you guys answering each other's questions. Great. I'm kind of slow. I'm looking at questions right now. They're about 15 minutes old. So feel free to talk to each other. What do you think would have been the likelihood of a German victory in Europe? Well, it depends on what German victory was supposed to mean. What did it mean? Did it actually mean Lebensraum in taking over Russia? No, that wasn't going to happen, right? It depends on what victory means for the Germans. Because they could have had victory if they had stopped at a few times, right? Like not invading the Soviet Union. But not something you will get asked on the test, that's for sure. All right, I answered this one. The outside evidence does not need to be in the same time period or location as the prompt, but you should try your best to do that. All right, Enlightenment, Renaissance, Scientific Revolution. Great. Okay, so yeah, what goes first? Renaissance, Scientific Revolution, then the Enlightenment. Yeah. So the Renaissance brought this new focus of studying secular things, non-religious things, which then led to more science, which the scientific revolution was about. It's like, hey, let's find these other reasons for why stuff exists that isn't just God did it. You know what I mean? And the success of the scientific revolution inspired the Enlightenment, because it's like the scientific revolution found a whole bunch of facts about the universe based off of scientific investigation and not resorting to dogmatic or like these religious just catch all like irrational, I guess, not irrational, but like invalid or like fallacious forms of trying to find knowledge. And basically what they were saying, the Enlightenment thinkers, is, hey, if we can find like these scientific laws out, like we have the human capability to do it, then can we find answers to like other types of questions, like what is the best way to organize a society, or what is the best type of economy, what's the best type of government? Because they were like, hey, we figured out scientific answers to all these other things about how like the world works and all that. Well, can we provide a rational analysis of like, is there a logically best form of society, government, politics? So they kind of all influenced each other. So Renaissance into the scientific revolution into the Enlightenment. Best things to know about the Ottoman Empire. Sure. They defeated the Romans. Okay. 1453, they conquer Constantinople, and they will take over that crossroads of the world, which is going to be very important. They're kind of give you the middlemen of trade routes there as well. They were a gunpowder empire, one of the earliest empires to really utilize gunpowder in their territorial expansion. It's why they were able to take and defeat the Romans, because the walls of Constantinople had stood for 1,000 years because there was no such thing as cannons, and cannons broke those down. I think, the rise of gunpowder also changed the history of warfare. Can't hide behind a castle anymore. Can't hide behind walls anymore. Knights are going to now become obsolete once gunpowder is invented. Also, they're a long empire. They lasted from the 1300s all the way until the 1900s, when they finally fell with World War One. All right. I think I've now covered this Ryoshkin. I think I've covered that pretty well. I've talked about this a bunch of times now, so hopefully I answered your question. If you have something more specific, go ahead and add it on. Trust, it'll be on DBQ. It was about the rights of women in Islam like 3 years ago, so I wouldn't plan on it. At least not from that. If it does, it could be. If it is on Islam, it's probably going to be a Unit 3, like Gunpowder Empire type thing. All right, we'll talk about Karl Marx. We can talk about Karl Marx. Okay, Karl Marx, German economic historical sort of philosopher here. He has a hypothesis, and he believes it comes from an analysis of history. He says history's events have been driven by the struggle between classes in history, the haves and the have-nots. His prediction is that eventually you're going to get such a division between the haves and the have-nots that the have-nots, or the proletariat, if you will revolt, and they will take over the means of production. Okay, the means of production is the way by which we create wealth: factories, farms, etc. And he hypothesized that will happen. The workers will basically revolt, and the result of that could end up being a communist society. A communist society is a stateless, moneyless, classless society, so that once basically the working class, the proletariat, takes over the bourgeoisie, capitalist, land owning and factory owning and business owning class, that will create that, will at least put that towards creating that classless, moneyless, stateless society. It can call for a global workers' revolution. Marxists see the world and see people through their social class rather than their race, which is a good contrast between, say, fascism, which sees the world by its ethnicities, and that where a Marxist will see the world more as based on class. You're more similar to somebody if you're poor than if you speak another language or from another country. If I say communism one more time, Nick shows up. That was a good one, Kalen saw. One more time, and the fat electrician shows up. All right. Anyway, let me get down to the next question. Glorious Revolution. You do not need to know about that unless you're an AP Euro. It won't be covered. And we hate AP Euro here. Ugh. All right. I'm trying to see what's the new question. Socialism and communism. Socialism is simply just when the workers own and operate the means of production, which means the workers have a say in their and a much more say and much more access to the fruits and the profits of their labor. So in a socialist system, the workers, for example, get a much bigger seat at the table of where they work and what happens to the profits of said work. Profits will be more equally shared. The workers will also have a much bigger say in what you do with the profits. Say, do we use this money to come back to us, or do we decide collectively here more to like use our money for future technological developments or something like that? Communism is a goal. It is a destination of creating a moneyless, stateless, classless society. They are not the same, although many believe socialism can be the road to communism. Many don't think that's necessary. Delhi Sultanate is an Islamic group that came and conquered northern India and set up the first real Islamic kingdom in North Africa. They were then taken over by another Islamic group, the Mughal Empire. Can you explain what the formatting of the prompts mean on the FRQs? I don't know exactly what you're asking here. They are going to you're going to answer a question using the historical thinking skills, which are compare, contrast, cause and effect, and continuity change over time. They often be asking you about the themes that are covered in AP history. If you know your teacher, maybe you taught you the acronym PIECES, PIECES. Basically everything, all the content falls into one of those 6 categories. Politics is PEICES, pieces, the acronym. Politics, innovations, economics, culture, environment, and society. Can you explain some resistances to globalization? Yeah, sure. So some of that resistance, it can be also like decolonization, the idea of not wanting to be ruled sort of by foreigners anymore. Some resistance is resistance against unfair trade practices that you might see. The exploitation of larger economies trying to basically globalize the economy to benefit them. Some other resistance to globalization would just be examples of like trying to keep your own culture and not adopt someone else's culture. Right, that's going to be also some of that. There's violent and non-violent things. So some resistance again might be violence that you might see like independence movements, say like Vietnam, or non-violent movements that get independence, say like India, as a couple examples. Go ahead, and that is topic. Hold on, let me go ahead and add a screen here, and I'll show you a little more. Hopefully y'all are aware of this ditty right here. This is the CED, or the course and exam description. Everything that is covered on this entire course and everything that you have to know is in this giant document right here. Let me put it over here real quick. And if you go down to unit, and this is on the main AP website, just look for, you can just Google AP World History CED. This will be in here. Let me go ahead and get to topic. The resistance one, that's like what, 9 point, what is it? 9.7. This one right here. Whoop. So some other ones that you can look at for specific examples. Anti-IMF, that means against the International Monetary Fund. So basically, the IMF was designed to give loans and stuff to developing places. Problem is there was a lot of strings attached that people did not like. Okay, the idea of world banks. So there's activism to try to combat that as well. And then also resisting some of the globalized things like China, for example. China is trying to resist a lot of the social and cultural globalization. So, for example, they block a lot of the famous social media sites, and then they make their own, like Weibo or what's the other one? What's the other social medias that are the Chinese ones that they allow? Because again, they block like YouTube and stuff like that. So anyway. If any of you want to see this document, I'll go ahead and post a link in chat real quick. Now, this thing's huge, it's like 200 pages, but. All right, we'll go back to me here. Hey, guys, I'm back. All right, let's see where I can pick up on some other questions you guys have. Again, super chats, thank you. Supreme KD, Professor What, Book of Dark, thank you so much for supporting the channel by sending a super chat to me. All right, let's see. I want to see where I left off. Okay, so we had that. This was the last one. Sorry, my dog just hit my desk, so the camera is shaking. Ugh, spice. Pieces. Spice is the old acronym because they added stuff to it. Yep. Because they added innovations and technologies. Don't use spice. Spice is not, it's invalid. It stopped being a thing back in like 2016 or something. Tell your teacher they gotta adapt. How do you get the complexity point? On the DBQ, I suggest doing it one of two ways. In fact, I would try to do both. Use all 7 documents and do HIP, which is the analysis, the document analysis for 4 of them. I would do that anyways. And then that's the best way to do it. For the LEQ, use at least 4 pieces of evidence that support multiple arguments. They will give you a scratch piece of paper. This is the first year the exam is digital, but I read that they will give you a scratch paper. You're not going to be able to bring it out yourself in anything like that, but you'll get scratch paper, which is going to be great because you're going to want to take notes on the DBQ and start to outline and do all those things. What are some examples of states affected in Africa and Asia in the second wave of imperialism? Africa, the entire continent, except for Liberia and Ethiopia. All of them got colonized, except those 2. Ethiopia was able to militarily defend itself against the Italians. Liberia was a protectorate of the United States because there were people in the United States that wanted Liberia to be the place where free slaves go to because they thought they couldn't assimilate into America. So there you go. All right, in Asia, Britain is going to colonize, well, first through the British East India Company, then officially after the Sepoy Rebellion, they're going to colonize India. Most all of Southeast Asia was colonized, places like Vietnam by the French, the Dutch in Indonesia. Japan will not be colonized. So, I mean, your question is, what are some examples of states affected? I mean, everybody was affected. Everybody was affected. Everybody was. It's a global age, so everybody was affected. But I was assuming you meant more like by the imperialism specifically of that era. So, all right. Okay, we already covered socialism and communism. Examples of violent and nonviolent resistance. Great. Yeah, violent resistance. I think Vietnam is a fantastic one to talk about because they fought off the French who colonized them and then also the Americans. For nonviolence, I would go with India and with Gandhi with nonviolent protests. Although there was violent resistance before in India's history, it's actually why Gandhi was against it, because the times where India did try, say, the Sepoy Rebellion in the 1800s, it got met with repression and even more imperial rule. South Africa, theirs is another one with nonviolence, although it did start kind of violent. Nelson Mandela used to basically do terrorist activities. and then stopped and joined into the idea of more like nonviolent protests. So ending the apartheid in South Africa is one. I would say the American Civil Rights Movement, that's not a decolonization movement. So there you go. Another violent one to know is Algeria. Similar to Vietnam, they were ruled by the French and they fought violently in a war. Could you review the land-based empires versus maritime empires? Okay, review the expansion. Yes, land-based empires is because of gunpowder. That's all you need to know. Okay, maritime empires is by seafaring technologies, and maritime empires were largely, and especially when you're talking about something like the Portuguese, were not as directly ruled by those European states. You're going to hear this term called trading post empire, where your empire is a bunch of trading posts around the world, where you actually didn't affect the culture as much of the and rule the people themselves as much as you just had a foothold in different parts of the world. Their expansion, a lot of it was by technology, both of them. Social was like communism in that social allows private property. Yes, there's private property. You own it. What you more jointly control is the means by which you, and remember the term property, guys. Okay, there's a difference between private ownership of stuff and private property. Private property specifically means places that you own that create value. Okay, so like a farm produces, or like a factory, that's private property. But like you owning a shovel, like you can own that. Make sense? The Boers, yeah. So the Boers were well, I mean, you go back to like the 1600s. Europeans were settling and colonizing in South Africa. So basically, it was these like people of European ancestry, especially the Dutch there, that were fighting. They'd been there for generations. Were fighting for their rule. They saw themselves as like indigenous people, even though they're not like Black African. They were whites that way. Significance in Timbuktu. It was the capital of the Mali Empire, and at a time, it was one of the intellectual centers of the Islamic world. The Marathas. The Marathas are the group that I was talking about earlier. I didn't mention them in name, that fought against the Mughals. So Aurangzeb, the Marathas were Hindus. Aurangzeb was one of the Mughal emperors that was like trying to end basically the religious diversity of India by imposing harsher rule and Islamic law. And the Marathas and others joined them to basically take out the Mughal Empire. Now, the Maratha Empire will not last long. The British East India Company is going to come in and really undermine a lot of their power, eventually leading the British taking over completely. How to write an SAQ, DBQ, and LAQ. It gets way too long of a question for me to get into. Search Heimler's history, and he has fantastic videos on all of those. All right, we just did violent and nonviolent decolonization, so hopefully I answered your question. What important things do students need to focus, or students need for historical thinking? Okay, just make sure you know what the skills are. Compare, contrast. Okay, compare, contrast. How are things similar or different from each other? Continuity and change, meaning it's something as it existed. If it's a continuity, it's existed through multiple time periods, through multiple people and civilizations. Change means it's something new. It's something different that people in that place were not doing before. And then cause and effect, hopefully, is pretty self-explanatory, right? Something happened. What was the result of it? So Terry, can you help me with my history homework? Probably not, unless you have a question. All right. Hey, shout out to Mrs. Terrell, 5th period class. Y'all rule. If you're here, tell your teacher hello. I know every history teacher in the world, so hi, Mrs. Terrell. Your name pretty close to Terry, so that's pretty cool. How much evidence do we need on the LEQ? Go for at least 4. If you get at least 4, then you're going to get the complexity point. Don't even pick an LEQ prompt if you can't think of 4 pieces of evidence. You get the choice between 3 prompts. Choose the one you get have the most evidence for. And hopefully, again, you know your content enough where you can have at least 4, because then you get the complexity point. Yes, there's a complexity point on the LEQ. You can look over the different ways. The easiest way is to have 4 pieces of evidence that support multiple arguments. So basically have evidence that can both support your thesis and contradict it, have different evidence that you would consider good evidence and then like mid evidence. Miss Rickards, what up? If you're in the chat, Riv says hi. Good luck to you and your students. Do an A-push review? I've never taught A-push. Sorry. When's A-push? When's the A-push test? Is it Friday? I've taught regular U.S. history classes, but I've never taught A-push, so I can't help you. Heimler tonight, Mr. Heimler is doing A-push. He's covering it tonight, so go to him. Or go to Tom Ritchie. Mr. Ritchie, Tom Ritchie on YouTube. He's one of the goats of A-push as well. Do you think Freeman PD's DBQ prediction? Did he say 3 and 9 as well? I did 3 and 9 before I heard anybody, and I think I heard Freeman also said 3 and 9. 3 or 9. Those were my predictions as well. All right, I think I'm about caught. Wait. Okay, these are oh my gosh, these are half an hour ago. Okay. Let's hurry up and try to get out. Trying to get ahead, scrolling ahead. Let's see. Do I just go with my gut thinking it's correct for multiple choice after eliminating 2 answers? No, because if you're left, okay, if you eliminated the 2 wrong answers, the 2 other questions are factual statements, but one answers the question and one doesn't. It's a factual statement, but doesn't answer the question. When you're down to those 2 and you can't decide, go back to the document. It should clarify. Hopefully. All right, we did a lot of resistance to imperialism. I hope we're good on that. Who brought the Cyrillic alphabet to Russia? Oh. Was that before Ivan? That's actually a good question. When did the Cyrillic alphabet... You were asking about Russia, right? Come adopted in Russia. Well, I don't think it became official for a while. Okay, so here, I'll show you what I'm looking at here. Whoa. No. This one. That one. Okay. My thing was more like, when did it become the official script? Came from Bulgaria. Yeah, they were already using it down in the Balkans. Kievan Rus. Kievan Rus brought it in the 900s. Interesting. I didn't know this. Peter the Great, he reformed it to be more European. It makes sense because Peter was like, yo, Russia, we're gross. Let's be more European. All right. I guarantee you will not have to know that on the test. Oh, yeah. Guys, join the Discord server. Where the heck are my mods? Let me nope, that's not it. Where? Sorry, one sec, guys. All right. Anyway, yeah, link to the Discord down below. There's an AP channel and just 24/7 history talk, so you can get there. I also link to some study guides and things in that channel as well. All right. By the way, thank you, Seth, for that super chat. I really, really appreciate your support there. Hopefully, I was able to help you there. Looks like, yeah, it came actually through Bulgaria. Then the Kievan Rus kind of adopted it that way. So, Seth, thank you for being a channel member. If you are a channel member, guys, you get early access to all my videos. And you get a lot more content that is for members only, especially old live streams and stuff like that. All my gaming streams. I also have a gaming channel. I haven't used it as much, Mr. Terry Gaming, but I hope everyone subs to the channel. All right, the cause of the Holodomor. Holodomor is the big starvation time in 30s in Ukraine while under Soviet occupation. It's been accused of being fairly intentional by Joseph Stalin. Ukraine was kind of the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, so a lot of grain was being taken out from there and taken to other parts of Russia, which left the Ukrainians with little food, which led to millions starving in there. Significance of Ivan the Great. Yeah, Ivan the Great is one of the guys that's really helped establish the Russia today and the Russian Empire. Okay, one of the early kind of OGs of establishing Russia back in the 1500s. Feudalism. Okay, you've run out of feudalism. Cool. Yeah, feudalism. After the Roman Empire collapsed, there was no political entity that really ruled over Europe like the Roman Empire did, which also meant that your sustenance and your livelihood was far more reliant on powerful people locally than some empire that rules from far away. You know what I mean? So, feudalism is a structure, it works both politically and economically, where the whole society is structured based off of loyalty. If you are just a regular person, back in these times, you needed food, you needed protection, you basically needed a livelihood, and the people that could give that to you were people that owned that and could protect it. Okay, so it's about being a vassal. A vassal is somebody that pledges their allegiance to somebody. So a feudal structure often went something like this. You may have heard this. You have a king, and they divide power up into nobles. These are other powerful families that are able to own and protect land, and they get to have all kinds of privileges because the king allows them to have a superior position. Now, one of the expectations for nobles is to both offer land and protection to the common people, say the peasants. So nobles, for example, would raise up protective forces, knights, if you will, that came from noble classes that would support the people. And to be able to have protection and a little bit of land for yourself, the peasants pledged their loyalty to these lords, these nobles. And that is how society functioned. You function largely within your community, on your manor, as it was called, and you were fairly self-sufficient. You worked land of the Lord, and then the Lord would pay you back by, getting you access to food, maybe a little bit of land for yourself. And with that, you were able to be kind of self-sufficient based off of your local community that way. What are some important, specifically European maritime invasions? Okay, awesome. So first off, things that they adopted. They adopted the astrolabe, which is a device used to find your latitude. That came from Arabs that were using it in the Indian Ocean, as well as lateen sails, which are triangular sails, which are great against crosswinds that Europeans also adopted from the Middle Indian Ocean Trade Network. Now, what the Europeans also brought in was ship design. The Portuguese used the caravel, which was a larger but mobile ship that was capable of going into open waters. They also developed the carrack, which was a little bit bigger, that could hold more stuff. And then the Dutch also innovated a ship called the Vloot, which I think was even bigger than those two. So they added those things together. Also using the compass, which was derived also in Asia, put all those things together, Europeans can start hitting the seas. Mr. Terry, what are the causes, effects, and differences and similarities between the revolutions? Oh, VidBuzz, that would take forever. That would take forever to do. Let's basically sum up all of Unit 5. Americans was about independence. Haiti was about ending slavery and getting independence. The French was for reformation of the government and acquisition of rights. Industrial Revolution was a revolution to increase production of materials using machines. There you go. Mexican Revolution, sure. Just real quick, that was actually the DBQ 2 years ago, was on the Mexican Revolution. So Mexico had a system where a very wealthy elite really dominated the land and land ownership. They also gave a lot of special preferential treatment and trade deals and an economic foothold also to foreigners. So the Mexican Revolution was basically a revolution of the common people to get more access to land and more political influence. Back in the early 1900s, it was successful, and they're going to create new laws and reform their governments to give more rights and opportunities for basically common people that way. Very similar to other peasantish type rebellions. Russian Revolution, yes. It was to take out the Russian monarchy and impose a communist, a socialist state. So the abuses of the longtime abuses of the Russian monarchy, which was still practicing feudalism, by the way, was oppressive, extremely oppressive, and a coalition of basically urban and agricultural workers came together that first deposed the government in the first stage of the Russian Revolution in 1917, which removed the royal family from power. There was a provisional government for a while, but that would eventually become to be dominated and won over after the Russian Civil War ends in the early 1920s with the Bolsheviks, or the Communist Party. They were Marxists, led by Vladimir Lenin, who will win out and established the USSR, or Soviet Union. Basically a communist revolution that works. Can you go over the history of China? That's way too broad. I'm sorry, Anthony. If you can give me a more specific question, China's been around for 3,000. The current China, the Chinese dynastic cycle, has gone on for like 3,000 years. So that would be kind of hard. LEQs, okay. DBQ. I don't know. I was leaning towards units 3 and 9 just because they haven't done those. LEQs, I can guarantee one of these will be on it. Okay, it'll be something about the Mongols, the Silk Road, the Columbian Exchange, the Industrial Revolution, or the Green Revolution. I bet one of those is in it. Can you break down sourcing in DBQ? Sure. So HIP, H-I-P-P. It's the acronym all your teachers should be using for at least 4 of your documents. Okay, it says 3 in the rubric. Do 4 because you get the complexity. You need to break down why the historical context, the intended audience, the point of view of the author, or the purpose of the document. You need to write about what one of those are. Okay, so like what that is and the significance of it. So for example, point of view. Okay, point of view has to do with the author. And when talking about your essay, what you would do for sourcing is say the author of the document is this person, and it's relevant to know that in order to interpret this document because blank, blank, blank. For example, let's say you had a document that was a Mongol a description of the Mongol Empire by Marco Polo. Okay, now it would be very relevant to know a description of the Mongol Empire for Marco Polo. It would be really relevant to know who Marco Polo was, because he is going to have a perspective here totally different, because his point of view or his worldview is very different than Mongols. Why? He's from Italy. He's a Venetian trader. He is a Christian. His interpretation of the Mongol Empire is going to be based off of those are his glasses, right? So if you feel like there could be an inherent bias or something, you would bring up the point of view of that document when you're analyzing the document. You would, say that this was from Marco Polo, who was a Christian Venetian trader. That's important to know because his perspective comes from somebody that has never been to Asia and has never known the Mongol Empire. So he interprets it through there. So it may be a little bit of a bias or specific type of interpretation. So anyway, now, again, that's one category. You also have historical context, and that would be that in the document, when you're analyzing the document, arguing with the document, you bring up what was going on at the time and the place of when or where this document was created. Was there some kind of war going on? Was there something going on? Why? What was going on at the time? And if you think that's important to note when analyzing the document, you do that. Okay. Intended audience. Okay. In the HIPP thing. Intended audience would be when you think it is necessary to bring up who this document was supposed to be seen by. And you would bring that up if you think that they wrote that article or made the painting knowing in mind who was going to see this thing. So the way that they wrote it was impacted by who they thought would see it. Is it a letter to, maybe it's a letter from some person to a king? Would it be important to know that? Yeah, because they are trying to write it in a way that can maybe be convincing or something. It'd be important to know that who this was meant by. All right, then the other one is purpose. And purpose was this document intended to do something? So was it written in a way where that wanted to have an effect? And you would bring that up in your analysis. Now, remember, it's not just about bringing up what the HIP is. It's why is it relevant to know that for your argument? You have to make sure you bring that, otherwise you don't get the point. Okay. Do that for documents, and you get the complexity point as well as the sourcing point. All right, what else? Treaty. I saw something about a treaty. Treaty of Ghent. That ended the War of 1812, which you will not need to know for this class. Probably need to know it for A push. Probably for A push. But nobody cares about the War of 1812 unless you're Canadian. Yeah, I can't go. Okay, I already saw that. Can't quite. Oh, I'm starting to get repeats. Sorry. Pros and cons of utilitarianism. That's a little bit philosophical. Con, I don't know. Efficiency. Pros is equity. Scientific revolution considered unit 4 or 5. So 1450. Probably after. Is it true that scientific revolution was because the scientists thought the white men were more superior as their head was bigger? No. Probably social Darwinism. A free market economy is basically where anybody can trade and do business with anybody else, internally or externally. You can make your own businesses and you can do business with whomever you want. Can you explain how land-based empires legitimize their rule with architecture? Okay. Yeah. When you build big stuff, it provides evidence that you're powerful. It's really that simple. King Louis, okay, Louis the 14th in France builds the Palace of Versailles. It's the biggest, fanciest, most expensive palace in European history. Why? It's a symbol of his power. It exudes power. It can have functionality. For example, it could house thousands of people. So he would have nobles stay there all the time. So he could hodgepodge with them. He can keep an eye on them, that sort of thing. The Taj Mahal, right? Taj Mahal. Its functionality isn't very much. It's a tomb for Shah Jahan, the Mughal emperor's wife. Why is that important? If you can build something like that, a masterpiece, it is proof that you're in charge. because obviously you are very powerful if you can do that. Main trading cities that you need to know from Unit 2. Samarkand. That's probably my favorite. Samarkand. Constantinople. Go with those two. Can you explain social Darwinism? Sure. So it's kind of a bastardization of Charles Darwin's theory on natural selection of evolution through natural selection. Essentially, Charles Darwin, his thesis is that, across the animal kingdom, stronger, more adapted species to their environment tend to thrive and succeed, right? And traits that allow you to be successful in your environment will then get carried on. Basically, nature is unequal. There are these superior, more fitted species. Okay, social Darwinism is like a bastardization of that, of applying that to human race. That just like in this animal kingdom, there are these different, more adapted, suited species. That in the human race, there are basically superior cultures, there are superior races among the world. So it was a justification for imperialism, especially on a cultural level, that, if you were like, especially the Europeans who kind of had this concept, we're talking about this concept, would basically be the justification of why is Europe advancing at such a rate? Why do they have these new technologies? Why is this stuff happening? It's because there's something inherent about them that is superior, whether it's their form of religion or their technologies and all that. It was a way to try to find some almost like scientific racism. Is hip or happy better? Happy, no, get rid of the why. I mean, the why is necessary because it means why is it important, but hip are the 4 categories of there. Why is just an extra thing. I also like the idea of using an I instead of an A between intended audience and audience, because I do think intended audience and the word intended is important, because the audience of a document might not actually end up being the audience that the author intended. And the only thing that matters when someone's writing a document is who they think is going to see it, because who they think is going to see it is going to determine how they write something and in the way that they do write something. All right. I think I'm getting a lot closer now to what was Tibetan Buddhism. I don't know a lot about the specific tenets of it, and neither will you need to know that. So, all right. I am going to just fast forward to the present now, because my thing is all like, well, my chat thing is a little bit off. What do we do if we don't know what the prompts are talking about? You will. For the DBQ, it won't matter, because everything you need to know about the topic of the prompt will be in the documents. For the LEQs, you're going to have 3 different LEQs to choose from. You will know one of them. Okay. If for some reason you don't, which you won't, you'll know. Just start talking about anything you can think of. Just write on your scratch paper for the sake of writing. If there's a block, just start writing anything you know about anything. And eventually, the more you think about that, it's like a clogged faucet. If the evidence and stuff isn't coming out, just write anything on the piece of paper that you've heard of in history. Anything you've heard of in history. And that gets your brain rolling, and eventually that clog in the faucet gets out, and then whoosh, all the ideas will rush. It's in there. The stuff is in there. You've taken the class. You've done this. Can you go over the Sunnis and Safavids, please? Well, Sunni is a sect of Islam. The Safavids was an empire who were Shia. So Sunnis, most people are Sunnis. Most empires have been Sunni. Safavids were Shia, though. Sunnis believed one of their big differences, their original split was on who should be the caliph or successor to Muhammad. Sunnis believe it should be somebody chosen by the community. Shia, like the Safavids, believe that it should be from the line of Muhammad's family. Is it possible to go over humanism and its impact? Yeah, sure. Humanism, just real quick, is kind of the study of like more secular things rather than religious things. It was the philosophy behind the Renaissance, the study of these secular things, and that really gave the big impact. Is it that philosophy is what the Renaissance was tied into. So it was again focusing on more secular things. So in that they ended up going to a lot more secular information, science, a lot of the stuff that from ancient Greece and Rome. Renaissance literally means rebirth, and it was like a resurrection of Greco-Roman, a lot of philosophy, art, and architecture. So it created the Renaissance essentially. Impacts on religion and state building for 1200 600. Okay, that's way too vague, Owen. I'm gonna need you to be more specific. Okay. Oh, a bureaucracy and a meritocracy. A meritocracy is where you earn your position by your actions, your deeds, like you earned it. Bureaucracy is simply just it's a government that does the will of the leader. Like you have a king and you may have a bureaucracy. You have all these people that kind of do the bidding. They carry out the and enforce like government policies. Zheng He, sure. Zheng He was one of the greatest navigators and seafaring travelers in history. He was employed by the Ming early on in the Ming history, and he ends up going on these voyages over many, many years that went all the way around the Indian Ocean, or around the whole Indian Ocean network. So he went from China to Southeast Asia to India to the entire eastern coast, most of the eastern coast of Africa. He traveled more than probably anybody ever did. His goal was not colonization. He was sent by the Ming government to basically pronounce the glory and the existence of this new Ming Empire. Remember the Ming Empire, the ones that took over the Yuan dynasty, which was the Mongols in China. They would try to Zheng He would try to gather tribute and some relationships, but these weren't trade missions. They weren't really economic voyages that way. But it really kind of spread news about the Ming dynasty in China to these other parts of the Indian Ocean. He was traveling further and more than 100 years before pretty much guys like Columbus and stuff were hitting that. Interestingly, though, not long after Zheng He, the Ming dynasty stopped all of their foreign exploration. Confucianists, which really were taking over the governments. Remember, Confucianists value two different professions: academia and agriculture. Merchants are seen in negative light in Confucians. They talk about it as like social leeches, essentially. So they thought these were massive wastes of money, that the Chinese should invest more in protecting themselves. Remember, they had just gotten over the Mongol rule. They wanted to focus more on internal stuff. And they actually banned a lot of foreign seafaring voyages after that, dismantled the ships. They reinvested in rebuilding the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall of China you see today was a Ming creation, improved upon by earlier walls and sets of walls. China in Unit 9. Yeah, I mean a lot. You went from the final dynasty, the Qing dynasty, to about 30 years of the Chinese Republic, and then the communist or the civil war in China. The communists take over and are going to rule from basically 1949 all the way till today. Kashgar, great trade city to know for sure. DB predictions, probably 3 or 9. And not probably, but I think 3 or 9. However, they will never, they don't use any formula to do it. They don't do it. They'll pick whatever they want. Truman Doctrine, great one. This is American foreign policy that says that if communism is going to spread, the Americans are going to intervene and stop it. It wasn't worded that way, but that's essentially what it was in action. You had these, it kind of starts with Greece, which was on the verge of a communist takeover. There was a civil war. The Americans went in support of the non-communists there because the idea was, it has to do with containment policy too. It's like the Americans understand communism is going to exist where it does. China, Soviet Union, okay, whatever. But if it's going to spread anywhere, the Americans will intervene in some aspect to stop the spread of communism. And the Americans did. Monroe Doctrine. Okay, I just answered Truman Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine is an American foreign policy that says the American imperialism is going to focus on the Americas, so the Western Hemisphere, and also Europe should stay out of the Western Hemisphere. That is America's zone. Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. That's America's turf. Important kingdoms in Africa. Sure, let's talk Great Zimbabwe, probably the greatest and civil of the civilizations from the early time period. Great Zimbabwe had the biggest stone structures down there. They did a lot of trade, agriculture, but yeah, they built that. The Mali Empire under Mansa Musa was one of the richest empires, and they were an Islamic empire, so you want to know them for sure. I think those two are very important. I would, although they're not an empire or kingdoms, I would understand the Swahili states, Swahili city states. In East Africa, there's a bunch of these city states that ended up developing a blend of African culture as well as Muslim, like Arab culture. In fact, one of the products was Swahili, the language, which has a mix of indigenous Bantu language elements, as well as like Arabic elements to it too as well. So those are a couple of really good ones, I would say, to know. Safavid Empire fall, internal problems, internal collapse. Ooh, nice. What was the effect of joint stock companies like VOC and the Indian Ocean Trade Network, and how did it affect big empires? Cool. This is great. So a joint stock company is a company that has private investors, but it operates with government support and approval. The VOC, which is the Dutch East India Company, is the most profitable company in the history of the world. In fact, I will show you something. Check this out. You guys want to know how rich the Dutch East India Company was? Again, you'll see it acronym as VOC, which is actually in Dutch. I don't know the Dutch translation of it, but okay, let me pull this up. Check this out. You ready to have your minds blown, you guys? That's not it. Show this one. How do I show this? Where is it? Oh, there it is. Oh, that looks terrible. Dang it, you can't see this thing. It's all right. Let me I got this. Talk amongst yourselves for a second. Who's your favorite Mongol ruler after Genghis? There we go. Okay. Let's go ahead and look at this. Something wild here. In modern day money, the Dutch East India Company in 1637 was probably worth $7.9 trillion. Okay. You would have to get to $7.9 trillion today. You would have to add up all 20 of these companies on the right. Apple, whatever Alphabet is, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, Alibaba, which is like the Chinese eBay, ExxonMobil, Bank of America, Chevron, Visa, freaking Walmart, Wells Fargo, Johnson & Johnson, Berkshire Hathaway, that's Warren Buffett's company, Tencent, Samsung, AT&T, McDonald's, Netflix, Tesla. Add those together, 7.9 trillion. Alphabet is Google. Oh my God. Are you serious? That's insane. So then, how could you possibly achieve this? Now, I want to go ahead and also bring in the British East India Company because they did it as well. All right. Profitable because, okay, so these ships and stuff had private investors. But here's what helps these companies. The government, because this is still the idea of it's still like has a mercantilist. It's like in this weird nebulous thing of mercantilism, but capitalism there as well. The government is like, what do you guys need? Right? Dutch East India Company, the British doing this. What do you guys need? Oh, you need gunships. You need guns and cannons to go and dominate and go like take over colonies. Like if you're the British, you're like, yo, we want to monopolize all of the spices. So the government's like, okay, here's what you can do. You have our permission. We're gonna deck you out and get you all the technology you need. Get all your cannons and all that. You have permission to literally go wage war on yourself. You can raise an army. You know what the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Companies are, you guys? What if Amazon had their own military? What if Walmart had an army and the government was like, sick, go ahead and do it. There you go. And they monopolized entire industries. There you go. Jack, thank you so much. Jack, dropping the $2 super chat, said not in world history, but wanted to say thanks for the content. You are so very welcome, my friend. I really, really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. Can you explain what a continuity is? Yeah, it's just it's some kind of topic, some kind of thing. Maybe it's a religion, maybe it's just whatever, a technology that's existed for over multiple periods of time, over maybe different civilizations, over different time periods. A great example, one of the greatest continuities in history is Confucianism. Regardless of what Chinese dynasty and what government was ruling over China, Confucianism was still at the core of Chinese society and politics. Make sense? Can you go over the framework of the LEQ? Sure. Let's look at the rubric. Y'all want to look at rubric? Rubric. Okay. There are 6 things that are required in your LEQ. Let's scroll down to it. Here's a practice test, by the way. By the way, we've now been going on for about 2 hours. I'm probably going to start in sort of the wrap-up session, I guess I would say. I don't know. There we go. LEQ. Okay, the framework is you need a thesis. Oh my gosh, I just screwed up. Where is it? DBQ, LEQ, LEQ. I hate the formatting of this file. Okay, LEQ. You need a thesis. You need to make a claim. You need to answer the question of the prompt. You need to make a claim. If it's asking you for the causes of something, you better dang well say what those causes are. If they want you to know about the similarities between two things, you in your thesis say what those are. Contextualization. You should actually do this before your thesis. In the first paragraph of your essay, this is where I would suggest putting context. Context is where you are going to explain relevant historical events that led to the topic of the prompt. If you are ever doing an essay about the causes of World War II, you better be talking about, for your contextualization, talking about World War I and its effects. It needs to be specific. You need to talk about certain specific terms, names, people, events for your context. I would finish your first paragraph with your thesis. Blank and blank. Whoops. Yeah, blank thing led to massive causes to a large extent, whatever it is. But anyways, you got that. Okay, you need to have evidence in your LEQ. 2 pieces minimum, 4 gets you more points. Okay. You need to have at least 2 pieces of specific evidence, something you can name, you can define, and you can explain to support your thesis. You need to have at least 2 pieces of evidence to do that. However, don't go for 2, do 4, because you will get the second point for complexity. If you have 4 pieces of evidence, look right here. If you have 4 pieces of evidence that support multiple arguments in your essay, your prompt should have more than one, or your thesis should have more than one argument. You can do it in a couple ways. You could say, you could have a counter argument. Here's my argument, and here's the counter argument. Have evidence to support both. You may say, here's my argument. Here's a couple arguments about the effects of something. Here are the best arguments. Here are like the mid arguments. Have different pieces of evidence for that, at least 4 minimum. You also get a point for using one of the historical thinking skills. This is usually embedded in the prompt. In your LEQ especially, your essay is going to be one of 3 categories. It's either a compare-contrast, a cause-effect, or a continuity or change essay. Make sure you identify that and write an essay based off of that historical thinking skill. All right. If you got something more specific, we can talk about it, but we'll see. Technological advancements from the Industrial Revolution. Holy crap. Steam engine, planes, trains, telephones, cars, electricity, steel. Go on and on, a lot. All right. All right. Looking for some more. Difference between legitimize and consolidate. Yeah. Legitimize means you're giving a reason for why a certain thing is the way it is. So if you're legitimizing your government, it's how are you going to convince people that you should be an authority? Consolidate means that you are, if you're consolidating something, it means you have found ways and you're developing ways to control it. So it's like legitimizing is like the reason for why you should be in power, and consolidation is how are you going to control it. Is that a good way to do it? Anything we need to know about Portugal? Yeah, Portugal, the most important thing about Portuguese history is that they started the age of exploration. They're the ones that kicked off the foreign exploration. They started that. How do I get better at POV analysis? Yeah, just basically you want to do this. When you're doing POV, talk about who the author is and why is it important to know who that author is. What is their background information? Things like, what do they do for a living? Where are they from? And why is that important to know if you're interpreting a document? One of the best ways to do this is to indicate if you think the author has a bias. If you think there's a bias of the author, that is POV. How would you format a compare and contrast essay for LEQ and DBQ? The same way. If you're doing a compare and contrast, how I would format it is whatever. If you think the things are more comparable or contrasting, okay. Try to decide which one has more evidence. Is something more? Are these two things more similar to each other, or are they different for each other? And what I would suggest is your paragraph that is the weaker one. Like if you say they're actually more similar than they're different, I would actually have your first paragraph, your first body paragraph, be the weaker ones. Be like, hey, there were differences between these two things, and go ahead and bring up evidence for that. Then your next paragraph and the rest of your essay say, however, they were more similar, they were more comparative, and here's why. I like to bring up the weaker argument first and the better argument second. Make sure you have evidence for both, though. That's how you get the complexity point. Difference of colonialism, imperialism. Colonialism usually means they're a direct, the people or place you conquer is under your direct rule. There's a lot of different forms of imperialism. So colonialism, you're really more like ruling them. But imperialism, it may mean like you don't directly rule over them, but maybe it's economic imperialism in the sense that like you kind of dominate their economy. You know what I mean? Or maybe you're just interested in cultural reasons. You don't really want to rule over them, but you want them to like be your religion. That could be one. Militarily, maybe it's military imperialism, where it's like you're not really ruling over them, but like, hey, we want a military base here. The Delhi Sultanate and Mughal Empire, sure. Delhi Sultanate Empire came first. They came and invaded northern India. They were Muslims and ruled there. And then the Mughals, who were also Muslim, came later and defeated them and ruled on top of them in India. What about getting an analysis point for DBQ? Okay, I would suggest one of two ways. The two easiest ways to get it is using all 7 documents or doing HIP for 4 documents. I would suggest doing both. Sniper, thank you, from Germany. Hello, hello. Guten Tag. Extent to which Mongols had a lasting legacy post-rule. Sure. The Mongols were responsible for what's called the second golden age of the Silk Road. International trading connections expanded greatly during their rule because they conquered so many different empires and also deliberately transferred goods and encouraged trade and transfer of people and technologies and ideas all along that. So under them, a lot of stuff got traded. It's how gunpowder made its way to Europe. It's how the plague made its way to Western Europe. Okay. They brought in elements of all the different cultures and transferred them to different places. The world became more connected as a result of them. They're the reason why this course, Modern History, starts with the Mongols. What formula do you suggest for writing the thesis? Sure. I would say, well, I mean, it depends on the prompt, but I like, because you're going to get depending on how it does it. The classic way was to say, although counterpoint, comma, point 1 and 2. That's such a stupid way to explain it, but basically address the prompt and then put a comma and then say because of blank and blank and blank. And also say to a high extent. If it's about the effects of something, say these things created effects to a high extent or maybe to a low extent. There's a lot of different ways to get your thesis, to be honest. Just answer the question and give reasons why. Vasco da Gama and Henry the Navigator, yes, both employed by the Portuguese. Henry the Navigator is often credited with kind of setting up the Age of Exploration by doing some of the early and financing and leading some of the expeditions of Western Africa that Europeans had never done. And then Vasco da Gama was the first European to sail all the way around Africa to get to Asia. Is it important to know explorer names? I would know some. I think the two most important are going to be Columbus and Vasco da Gama for ocean. Otherwise, for the seafaring ones, or so the other land-based ones, they're not really explorers, but travelers, if that counts. Even Batuta and Marco Polo for sure. And then the other sailing kind of explorer, Zheng He, know him. How much source analysis do I really have to do? Do 4. I would suggest doing it for every document, though. Man, you guys got a lot of Delhi Sultanate questions. Islamic Empire that invaded and ruled over North India. Reconquista. Reconquista is the reconquest by Christians of Spain. So back in the 700s, the Moors, as they were called, and going back to the Umayyad Caliphate, had invaded Spain, and they ruled Spain from 700 all the way till 1492. What the Reconquista was Ferdinand and Isabella, who were king and queen up in the north part of the Iberian Peninsula, came and finished off conquering the rest of Spain and drove out the Muslims out of there. What they also did too is drove out any non-Christians. You're also going to get the Inquisition, and which punished any type of non-Christian. So you had Muslims, but also, if you remember, the Jewish community. One of the effects of it was, first off, Spain is going to be the Catholic state now. It also drove out like Jews. In fact, a lot of Jews, they left because of the persecution. It actually went to the Ottoman Empire. So they went to the Middle East. That's why Jews started moving to the Middle East there, because it was a lot safer for them than, say, Spain. Decolonization and the significance of it. Sure. Decolonization just means the process by which former colonies become independent. After World War II, the last empires that really existed were losing control of their colonies. So, like, remember how Africa was completely colonized by Europe, except for a couple instances. After World War II, these empires couldn't hold on to those colonies anymore. So through either violent or nonviolent measures, most of the colonies of, say, Britain, France, as a couple examples, were getting their independence. So the significance of it was, yeah, a whole bunch of new independent states are going to be created. My recommended way for earning complexity point for the LEQ is to use 4 pieces of evidence. For the LEQ or DBQ, it's using 7 documents or doing HIP for 4 documents. How do you most efficiently do HIP? Yeah. So after you've analyzed the document, I would end your document analysis with doing your HIP. So, in your body paragraph, let's say you have a body paragraph, we're using 3 documents to make an argument. You're going to go through each of the documents in that paragraph, right? Document 5 says this. This demonstrates that blank, this demonstrates blank, right? Which should tie to your thesis. But then I would wrap that before you move on to the next document was saying, additionally, it's important to know the point of view of this document. The point of view of this document is from Marco Polo. And Marco Polo was a Christian Venetian trader. So his depiction of the Mongol Empire is going to have some bias because his limited experience has been limited to his life as a Christian, whatever, person there. So I would do that at the end of each document analysis. And I would do it for every document. I know you only have 4 minimum, do it for all of them. Vijayanagar Empire was a trading empire in Southeast Asia, down Southeast Asia. Devshirme system, that's the one where the Ottoman Empire basically forces people into service. And the famous example, of course, is from the Christian lands of Europe, where they would take young boys from Christian lands, basically make them slaves. They could do that because slavery is forbidden in Islam. But however, you cannot enslave other Muslims. So if you took them from Christian lands, that was okay. A lot of them were recruited and trained to be soldiers. The good example is the Janissaries, who were basically slaves, basically born and bred, brainwashed into being super soldiers. So they could serve, whether it's in servants in government or service for the military. It's how they grew their presence and control. Tanzimat reforms is basically just economic reforms of the Ottoman Empire, trying to modernize them. It was trying to modernize them, and it had moderate success. Examples of leaders who use civil disobedience to protest colonization. Sure. I would go Gandhi in India with boycotts. And then also I would go with Nelson Mandela in South Africa. American response to the Armenian genocide, non-existent. Does counter argument work for complexity in DBQ2 or just LEQ? It works for both. The analysis point for DBQ, basically for LEQ is do a historical thinking skill. Use a historical thinking skill in your essay, meaning compare, contrast, continuity change over time, or cause and effect. Okay. Now, also, you have complexity for both of those. So basically, they want you to have a nuanced argument. Not only do they want you to write an essay, they want you to have an essay that really tiers your evidence and makes multiple types of arguments, even arguments that may counter each other. You bringing up a counter argument is a great way to write history and write a thesis, because it's like, hey, I know what the counter arguments are. Here are the counter arguments, but here are my arguments. I'm going to explain why my arguments are better, or why this evidence is better evidence than this evidence. That's what you should be doing in your essay, both with DBQ and LEQ. How should we make sure our analysis is sufficient enough to explain our point? That's a good question. Now, again, there's different forms of analysis of what we're talking about here. So depends if you're talking specifically the rubric about like complexity point or just like historical thinking skill, or like doing HIP. I would say this just in general about analysis. Make sure you explain why whatever you're talking about is relevant. Tie it back to the prompt. Tie it back to the prompt. Tie it back to the prompt. Same thing for you, Candace. Tie it back to the prompt. Why is it relevant to know the HIP categories? Why is it, what is this evidence actually evidence of? How does it actually prove the point you're trying to make? Srivijaya, Southeast Asian trading empire. There you go. Continuity across history. Greatest piece of continuity, I would say, is Confucianism. Civil service exam over there. Oh, you're answering somebody else. Casta system. Looks like you guys took care of it. Yeah, essentially casta system. When the Europeans colonized the Americas, they had a very racially structured society. Essentially, the more European you were, the higher up you were in society. By the way, because I can't go into crazy amount of detail for all these. One of okay, there's a couple AIs that are good and some that don't. Don't use ChatGPT. It's terrible for AP World History. It's not good. It's not good. It doesn't know what is in our curriculum. However, use DEAP because the sources that they are working from are ones that are what they draw from are sources that our curriculum is using. Does that make sense? For example, I'm going to put a link in chat. If you guys have some questions and want a little more feedback on your essays, you can give them your prompts and stuff. Or if you have a question about specific content, go to this DEAP Learning. It's the one that Heimler is using. And yeah, it takes the source material it draws from is material that is closer to our curriculum. So, like, for example, I'll give you an example right now. I saw, let's see, somebody just brought up, actually, this is perfect. There was a question on, somebody asked about the Prague Spring. I forgot where your comment was, but okay, so let's say, for example, you want to know more about the Prague Spring. Okay, DAP Learning. I put the link. I'll paste it a couple more times. Go here. This is a good one. And on the left here, you can see it help you with SAQs, LEQs, and DBQs. Basically, give them your prompts. It'll give you some good feedback. All right. But this one, just learn. If you click on learn here, this is a good one. This is where you can just ask a lot of questions for that. Let's see. What was the Prague Spring? Bam. Okay, let's see that. Let's see what it comes up with here. Prague Spring overview. Okay, you can see some of this. It was a period of political liberalization in Czechoslovakia during 1968. It was marked by attempts to reform the communist government and create a more democratic society. Key features. Okay, the reforms. Led by Alexander Dubček, the movement aimed to introduce greater freedoms, including freedom of speech, press, and travel. Public support. Many citizens supported these freedoms, hoping for a more open and less repressive regime. Soviet response. Soviet Union and other Warsaw Pact countries were not having it. They invaded Czechoslovakia, crushed the reforms, leading to return to strict communist control. The legacy. Prague Spring is remembered as a bold attempt to challenge Soviet authority and is often seen as a precursor to later movements for freedom in Eastern Europe. It showed the desire for reform could spark significant political change, even if it was ultimately suppressed. See? Anyway, that's a good one if you're looking for stuff. Again, if you want them to look at your LEQ, because don't use the Chat GPT. They don't know what they're doing. This one's a little bit better. I usually find with one thing AIs are going to do, you guys, is make your essay and grade your essay easier than the final was. They all, however, at the same time, they also have a hard time finding and assessing your complexity point. That's one thing they're not great at. So anyway, that one is pretty good. I like the way it gives feedback on the actually, let me go back to this real quick. On your, or gives the way it structures the information when you want to know about content. Also on the side here, this is kind of cool. They have little summaries of each topic. If you go over here and click on course guide, and then something fun too, you can go and if you look on the side here as well, you'll see Quizbot, and there's some questions. You can do some practice multiple choice. They don't have documents to them, but the questions are good. Anyway, that's another one. Is I'm going to be wrapping up here pretty soon. Something you can go to and get some more help on. All right, let's see. How are we doing on super chats? Thanks everybody that's done a super chat. Supreme KD, Professor What, Book of the Dark, Seth Archibald, and Jack. Thank you for your super chats for supporting the channel here. All right, I'm going to give myself like 5 more minutes, you guys, because then I got to rest up for tomorrow. I have, the test is at noon, right, everywhere. And actually, my 2 AP classes I have before noon. So tomorrow we're going to prepare a little bit. And I want to get some last minute stuff prepared for that. Okay. Okay. Let's see. What was Tiananmen Square? Sure. It was a pro-democracy protest in Beijing, China, 1989, that was repressed by the government. They wanted more democratic reforms, and Deng Xiaoping, the government, said no. Its context is important because the late 80s was the era of pro-democracy movements all across the communist world. And it was successfully working in Europe as you had like the Berlin Wall falls and you're getting states pulling away. But China, not having it. Not having it. All right, final questions. I just wrote a mock DBQ. It gave me a 5 out of 7. GPT is 6 out of 7. DAP is 7 out of 7. That's for the same one. DBQs are really hard to do the AI because first off, they can't interpret images. It can't interpret the content of an image. It doesn't know. It gives out the complexity in different ways. So, I mean, the biggest thing is you guys need to know. You should know, you guys, when you finish your essay, what score it's going to get. You should know, because you should know what's in the rubric. How many pieces of evidence do I need, right? How many HIP analysis do I do? What's required in a thesis? What's required in context? You should be able to come out and say, yeah, that should be this. I mean, to be honest. Main points about Unit 9. Technologies, culture. Think of globalized culture, stuff that lends itself to globalized culture. Technologies that allow it, like the internet, telephone, transportation. The Green Revolution is easily one of the most important terms of the entire course. Go ahead and look into the Green Revolution. That has been on either the LEQ or an SAQ, I swear, the last like 3 years in a row. Okay. Make sure for Unit 9 you know examples of globalized culture, things like sports with the Olympics, companies like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Nestle, brands, multinational brands. Know about those. Can you explain how to get outside evidence? Great question. This is the one that the one that most people will probably miss is outside evidence. Okay. Outside evidence is like bringing in an 8th document. Now, it's not a document itself, but it's like it. What I mean is your outside evidence should be an example of something similar to what the other documents are saying or doing. Like maybe it's about the Vietnam War and it's about nonviolent, or it's about violent resistance. An outside piece of evidence, let's say you were talking about violent resistance, but there's no document about Algeria. Well, Algeria, similarly to Vietnam, was an example of violent, violence used to like get independence, right? So it's an example of something similar to the examples in your documents, but it's not in the documents, and you treat it just like it would be an 8th document. Okay. I also encourage you guys, when you're going to be doing your outside evidence, make it clear in your essay that you're doing that. Okay. I think a great place to put your outside evidence is at the end of one of your paragraphs, and it should fit in with the documents of that. And I would be very clear in being like, additionally, outside of these documents, evidence of violent resistance also includes the Algerian Civil War. But then you need to explain it. Like, okay, and what happened here was France was colonizing Algeria, and the Algeria put together a resistance movement, and it eventually was successful and lent itself to the independence of, Algeria. You know what I mean? You provided the rubric and or hap during the exam. You will get a bulleted miniature version of it, but it will not have the detail that the one that you've been given or in the CED is. No, you should know the rubric going in. You can't not know it. You need to know what all 7 points are of the DBQ and all 6 points of the LEQ are. Key points of 8 or 7. That's too long of a discussion. You got to be more specific for me. Unit 7's World War. I mean, it's World War I, Inner Warriors, and World War II. It's like, that's so much. And then 8's Cold War and decolonization. So there's a lot. How did communism impact Europe? It led to the Communist Revolution, where they took away from their dictatorship of Batista, who was foreign backed, and brought in the Communist Revolution in the 1959, led by Fidel Castro. So another way it impacted Cuba was by bringing it closer to the Soviet Union, leading to things like the Cuban Missile Crisis. I should focus on 3 through 6. Yes. Yeah, 3 through 6 are huge. That's where a slight increase in percentage of content will come from. Is there? That's what are the main important things? I mean, the list is endless. Know the gunpowder empires, compare and contrast them for Unit 3. For Unit 4, know the maritime empires and the technologies. For Unit 5 is the revolutions. Be able to compare and contrast the revolutions. And 6, imperialism. Know who's conquering where and why they are conquering places. Where are they gatekeeping the rubric? They're not. The rubric's out. The rubric is publicly posted always. They're not hiding it. It's long. It's many pages. How do you source it? Basically, bring up whatever hip topic you're bringing up and then explain the significance of it. And I would talk about that once you're done analyzing what the document says and tying it to your thesis. Top 3 people. Impossible. Most important country-to-country conflicts. U.S., Soviet Union, Cold War, for sure. Ottoman Safavid. Germany, Soviet Union, World War II. It's off the top of my head. What developments were made in the Meiji Restoration? The Industrial Revolution. Essentially, Meiji Restoration started the Industrial Revolution in Japan and supercharged it. They industrialized their country in 10 years, making them the industrial power of Asia. Scramble for Africa. Why did this lead to ethnic conflicts after decolonization? Ooh, great question. Because the scramble for Africa was a competition between European powers. And one of the big impacts of how it affected decolonization is as follows. First off, these colonies were exploited and extracted, meaning no infrastructure and capital was being created for those countries. Also, borders were put up during the scramble Africa that did not take into account ethnic and historical divisions amongst the people, the indigenous peoples. So once decolonization happens, it becomes very problematic. These countries have had their resources taken away from them. There has been no infrastructure built, and what that's basically left them with is nothing. They're left with nothing to build their country with. So they will become independent, but don't have the tools or materials necessary to build the country. Also, it's going to create. Oh wait, you said ethnic conflict. Sorry. For ethnic conflicts, yeah, the biggest problem was that borders were created artificially by Europeans when they colonized that did not take into account ethnic divisions. So once decolonization occurs, there are ethnic problems of ethnic unity issues that led to things like civil wars and fracturing of society. Sudiata's influence, starting the conversion of Mali to Islam and increasing trade between north and south of the Sahara. All right, guys. I'm going to say this is the last one. All right. Oh, shoot. There are a bunch that just popped up. Did the Columbian Exchange include slavery? Yes. I'll do this. Encomienda and Hacienda systems. Big difference, not much. You could look into the details, but I don't think you're really going to have to know that. You need to know, like, I would know about the similarities more than the differences. Coerced labor. What are the social effects of industrial revolutions, changes and continuities? Social effects, creation of a middle class. Creation of a middle class. Continuity for social continuity. That's a good question. Social continuities for industrial revolution. I guess class differences. Difference being noble classes being replaced by industrial classes. How are the first and second industrial revolutions different? Power sources. First industrial revolution was more human powered, and then steam engine sort of powered machines. And then in the second industrial revolution, it was oil and electricity. Formatting for a force sourcing statement. Also, do you put quotes in the SAQ? No, don't quote. Don't quote in your essays. Speak. You should analyze it yourself. It makes you look bad if you quote the documents. There's no specific formatting for sourcing. Just make sure you bring up what it is and why it's important. SAQ predictions. I can almost guarantee there will be one of the following: something on the Mongols, the Silk Road, the Columbian Exchange, Just Revolution, and Green Revolution. If I was a betting man, one of those would be in there. Or something similar. All right. Okay, that's it. All right. Whew. I'm done. I'm done for now. Okay, from here on out, let me leave you guys with some things as you're continuing your night. There will become a point tonight, you guys, where it is going to be more beneficial for you to go to bed than to stay to keep studying. There is a point of when that is. Okay. You're gonna have to find that. At some point, that's gonna be your thing. Okay. So I guess a question would be, what do you do between now and noon tomorrow? I would say go do a practice test, but if you're in the United States right now, unless you're in like California, that might be hard to do. Okay. But you could do it. Right now, between now and the test, you need to look at what is it you struggle with the most and focus on that. Don't go over any more things tonight of stuff you already are comfortable with. Okay. Here's another thing. By the end of the night, if you haven't, you should know the rubrics, every point of them. All right. You need to know all the points of them. That is required by this point. That's something you have to know. Knowing is half the battle, to quote G.I. Joe. Okay. Um, what else? If you're going to be up tonight and you want to practice writing, you don't need to practice writing a whole essay tonight. Do this. Write the opening paragraph. If you want to practice writing tonight, the rest of the night, write the opening paragraph of as many prompts as you can before it's too late tonight. Here's why. Whether it's a DBQ or an LEQ, if you are able to successfully write the opening paragraph, you have set yourself up for most of the points. Because think about what goes into an opening paragraph. You got to have context. You got to have a thesis statement. To have a thesis statement, you have to have evidence. And you have to have an argument. Write the opening paragraph to a bunch of prompts. If you're going to be staying up anymore tonight, do it. Go get a bunch. Go find a bunch. Use your book. You got a bunch. Okay. Content-wise, it's going to be hard. Tune up your skills between now and doing that. Okay. Between now and you go to bed. Conclusion, no. Don't write a conclusion paragraph. It's pointless. You're better off spending the time you would spend on a conclusion paragraph, making sure you did everything right on your essay before. Okay. The only benefit of a conclusion paragraph is to make sure your thesis still matches your essay. When should I wake up if I'm coming to school at 11:30? Make sure you get up early enough to like eat, get something to eat. Okay. All right, guys, make sure I don't know what you're doing. In my school, we have Chromebooks. Make sure tonight before you go to bed, make sure if you are bringing a Chromebook or a laptop tomorrow, go plug it in right now. Go plug it in right now so it's charged. Okay. Go plug it in right now. Make sure it's charged. You should be getting a scratch piece of paper tomorrow. Okay. Bring something to write with, something dependable to write with. Yeah. Montu, it's been interesting this year. Unfortunately, I feel like this year's students kind of got the short end. First off, the AP test, this is going to piss you guys off, by the way, if you're in the class this year. It's a week earlier than it used to be. It was always in the second or third week. It is a week earlier this year. We all lost a week this year in it. And it's at noon this year, which is a first, which I don't know if that's good or bad. It's kind of good for me because I have my two AP classes before. I have my two classes before the test, before 12. So we'll actually get to do some last minute practice and review tomorrow. So yeah. Prepare for takeoff. Let me give you a link. You guys use this website tonight. If you want any help on any content, go here and ask this thing questions right here about if you have questions about LEQ, DBQ, short answer, or any content, go to DEAP Learning and go ahead and ask your questions. This is probably the AI I would trust the most on it because it's actually drawing from sources that are more approved by College Board. Okay. All right, guys, I'm out. Final words of advice. I guess I don't even know if it's advice. Okay. You've taken this class the whole year. All right. You've worked your butt off, even if you feel like you haven't. The knowledge is there. Okay. Tomorrow under pressure, you're going to feel dumber than you are. It's all there. It's there. Can I give you guys something I think that'll make every single one of you feel better? I will. This test is easier to pass than you think. Relatively speaking, if you can get above 50% on everything, you're going to pass. They're probably going to pass. You're going to get a 3. If you can get above, have you guys actually looked at the AP calculators? Now, the grade distribution is different every year. They grade on a curve. They give out basically a similar amount of 5s, 4s, 3s, 2, 1s. Okay, they do that. It's really about getting above 50% on. If you get above 50% on everything, you're good. And even if you don't on one of them, you can make it up on the other end. So chill. Also, your personal value and worth is not tied to this score. Okay. I'll tell you, in my history of teaching this course, which has been years, when I get the results in July, just like you do, and I can see all the scores of everybody in the class. Okay. For the people that don't get a 3, I would say 90% of the time, they were people that didn't take the class seriously and didn't prepare. They didn't take it seriously. Okay. What I'm trying to say is it's a very small percentage, I feel like, of the students I've ever taught that I'm surprised they didn't pass. That I would be surprised they didn't pass. For real. Right? What you put in is what it's going to be. All the AP classes are digital now, or all the history classes are. Okay. With that, you're all good. I'll drop the link to the AI one more time. You can use this if you got any more content questions, or if you want any essay feedback, go ahead and do that. And with that, I'm exhausted. I have been streaming almost 3 hours now. Please sub. I want to see all of you after this test ends. We're going to have more history fun for a long time. Sub to my channel. Like the video. Will you guys do something else for me tomorrow? Will you please thank your teachers? It's not easy doing what we do. I promise. And we care. Thank your teachers tomorrow for all the work that they've done for you. Go get a good night's sleep after you feel like you're good for the night. Okay. Be confident. You deserve a good score because you put in the work. All right, let me find a funny video to end with. Actually, I have this. If you are new to my channel, I usually end our stream in the same way we've done for years. We call it Building the Flag. Love you all. Have a good night.
We need to build the flag, protect our borders now. No entry from land or ocean. They keep taking our jobs, that's why we'll build the flag. Make America